Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Commander Tank episode number 37. My name is Timothy Zaganino, and joining me on the line, I've got not quite into Commander Chris and totally Commander pilled Teld. Today we're asking the hard questions. Do you pay the one?
And how much removal do you run in your Commander deck?
I feel like I'm paying the one every time I hear someone hyphenate pilled into anything. At first it was kind of funny, but I'm just like, if I had known the first time that I saw The Matrix when I was a kid that it was like, I wonder how many like Gen Z dipshits who like use pilled to describe anybody being into anything even know where the reference comes from.
But do you take the red pill or the blue pill?
I don't even remember what pill does which. I don't know. Given my history of pill taking, I'd probably take both.
But just for those at home, as our brief Commander level up for the day, you should treat Rhystic Study most of the time as if it was Sphere of Resistance.
All right, and this has been the Commander Tank episode number 37.
That's the whole, yeah. That's all the information that we need to impart to you today.
I'm sure we'll add one of those at the beginning of every episode moving forward now. But actually, you're here with the Jank Tank, where we talk about Cube. We're not quite into Commander. Once Chris like buckles down and actually starts doing it, then we'll make the transition. But we went over that last week, so we don't need to go over it again.
Here's my Commander hot take. Okay, if someone, and I don't play Commander, so take this with a pill of salt, but if somebody has Smothering Tithe on the table, whenever it triggers and they ask you if you're going to pay for it, you should just ignore them and pretend that they're not speaking. But if they reach for a treasure token to put it on the table, you just slap their hand really, really hard, right? That's the only way that you interact with and acknowledge them, is you just slap them really hard every time they try to create the treasure token. And that's how you actually destroy Smothering Tithe. It's hidden errata text.
My actual thing has been, if somebody plays Rhystic Study or Smothering Tithe, I complete that game and then I move on with my life because I don't feel like playing against those cards, and they're powerful, but they do not make games more interesting or fun, and therefore I walk away.
Hey, that's how I handle people thought season me in Q. I'm just like, I don't have to play with you anymore, jerk. Like, I'm out of here. I'll concede and go play with my hidden cards somewhere else.
You know what you should do? I mean, you can't do this in Arena, but like if you have a Thoughtseize gamer in your pod, what you should do is you show them your hand, they pick a card for you to discard, and then you just discard whichever card you feel like discarding. And then, similar to the Smothering Tithe example, you just completely ignore the fact that they're speaking.
This is Mike Long behavior. Have you heard any of the like Mike Long stories from the past, like the notorious Magic cheater?
No, I don't know who this is.
He's like old school Magic cheater, like well known Magic cheater too, like notorious for it. But he's actually one of the people who has one of those invitational cards because he won a tournament or something. And it's like,
oh Jesus,
was that a valid win? I don't know. It's like Root Water Thief though. It's like a terrible card. But there was like one of his stories being I don't know the exact details, but like he was playing Constructed in a morph format. According to documentation, he was playing against an opponent who had a morph, and his opponent shuffled their library, and he cut the deck and put the deck on top of the morph, and then claimed that the morph was dead because it was no longer on the battlefield.
What?
And yeah, like straight up just put his opponent's deck on top of the morph and claimed it was removal, like the morph was gone.
That's the kind of things you only get away with a supreme amount of
No, he didn't get away with that.
I guess, like, I feel like the judge should be authorized in that situation to just slap you as hard as they possibly can. Like, leave your chair.
The judges give out free lotus petals now to cheaters. Though.
Yeah, judges are in hot water these days after, what was it, Atlanta? Not this weekend, but last weekend, there was a really bad call where it felt like somebody wrote up their experience, and if you take it at face value, their opponent like played in such a way that they needed an extra mana to win the game and just didn't tap an extra mana for one of their spells so that they would have enough, and the judge eventually like ruled in their favor that like, oh, they just get the free mana because things have already happened. And it was like, okay, well, I guess the joke now is that judges give out lotus petals because they just got a free mana, they just win the game.
The thing is, though, is the opponent of the person who got cheated, and it is a cheat if you read what happened. They wrote up their report and were basically like, well, it was stressful in the moment. The judge gave me free mana, so I decided to be a scumbag and use it to win the game.
Okay, so they basically just said their version of events was the same as their opponent's version of events, but the only additional information it included was I was stressed out.
Yes.
Same
Yes.
story, only one
Yes.
additional irrelevant detail.
Yeah, the way that they wrote it, the way that it was written about, basically makes it look like they basically tanked for an extended period of time and then came up with a line that required 7 mana when they knew they didn't have 7 mana. And these are this is, I believe, a professional level player or near like a pro grinder. I'm sorry, but you don't make that mistake, right? You don't just be like, oh, I've got 2 scroll shifts and a hopeless nightmare in my hand and I need 7 mana. I miscounted my lands.
Hey, I was in an internationally ranked chess tournament and I got stressed out, so I moved my queen like a knight, and the judge decided that I could just do it.
Judge said it was okay.
Judge said it was fine.
Did I, before we get on the topic of actual cube here, I'm sure I've told you guys about my experience with, in round 15 of a GP where an opponent tried to partially crew a vehicle. Like, Sky Sovereign has crew 3, and I used something to kill a 1/1, and they're like, I'm going to go ahead and partially crew my Sky Sovereign with this 1 Thopter right now, and I'll crew the rest later. And I was just like, round 15, this is, again, another well-known tournament grinder, actually a writer for a big Magic website at the time, in round 15 of a GP trying to partially crew a vehicle, and I was like, hold on a second, Judge.
Yeah. So I just have to, like, ask, and I feel like I trash the Magic community really often on our Magic podcast. Like, I'm probably the reason this podcast will never get bigger. But what is the deal with there being, like, such a lower average emotional maturity level among Magic players than, like, Gen Pop? Like
literal sportsmanship is out the window when it comes to Magic players.
Well,
it seems like
it's crazy to me. And the other thing is, and I've probably said this on the cast before. I say it a lot in life. Not even for like, okay, let's toss like the moral reasons why cheating is shitty out the window. From a purely selfish perspective, I don't understand cheating because like presumably you're cheating to win, right? But you know that you didn't actually win. Like, how can you enjoy the sensation of winning if you didn't actually win? Like, again, like, scrapping, like, the moral conversation about, like, cheating your opponent or integrity or any of that other stuff, right, which is obviously important. But even if we, like, move that off to the side for a second, how can you enjoy a win that you didn't win? Like, I don't
because that's the sportsmanship conversation, right? It's like you have an internal need to feel like your win was justified, but if you don't have that sportsmanship, you feel like just getting the W on paper is enough. That's
even
sure,
still,
money,
like
money prize involved probably changes people's minds.
Yeah, money, like yeah, but like people. Okay, so like people who like cheat at like family board game night, it's like, what the fuck is wrong with you?
Yeah, okay. That's just degenerate.
Like, what is wrong with you? And again, like, I can like, even in the context of being, like, a hyper-competitive person who, like, needs to win, fine, but, like, but you didn't, though. So I don't get it. Like, you literally didn't win.
You swiped Boardwalk while nobody was looking, and you put it on your side of... I almost said your side of the battlefield for Monopoly. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think Monopoly has battlefields. I might be
Capitalism
wrong.
is a battlefield.
Monopoly is a battlefield.
Yeah. We chose different words, okay, but we said the same thing.
All right. Okay. We should probably talk a little bit about Cube here, just a little bit. We're going to talk about the evolution of white. Before we do that for Cube specifically, we should talk about the Jank Diver Gaming community. Remember, the best way to support Jank Diver Gaming and the Jank Tank podcast is to join our Discord server. Come draft with us, give us your feedback. It's a great place to hang out with like-minded individuals and talk about Cube, Retail Limited, and all things Magic. You can find links to our Discord server wherever you're listening to this podcast. And I wanted to take, I'm going off script, so hold on. I want to take just a moment to like kind of pat on my own back. Kind of hate doing that, but the server was really popping off this weekend. I think between Friday and Saturday plus what's going to be drafted today, we fired off maybe 10 events, so maybe throughout the whole week if you count like Wednesday and Monday, but we fired off like 10 different drafts across Peasant Cube, Mainline Cube, a couple specialty cubes. I think my Affinity Cube got drafted without me last night somehow. Even the Timeless Peasant Cube got voted for, which I don't think people know what they're signing up for. when they vote for a timeless peasant
I didn't even know
cube,
that we offered something like that.
It's not supposed to be an offering. It's a joke. It's a joke cube. People, it's a joke. It's alchemy.
It was an
swamp.
April Fool's joke that I made where it was power maxed peasant cube, which is miserable because it's all alchemy outliers beating non-alchemy cards. But then Mop puts it on the schedule and people vote for it. I'm like, no, you don't know what you're doing.
The timeless peasant cube should just be like a cube that contains rares.
Yeah, we had the biggest
just
draft we fired in quite a bit on Friday when we fired the timeless peasant cube. We subjected 14 people.
14
to this.
people. Yeah.
Oh my god, we
14
had a
people.
14 player event recently. That hasn't happened in a little while.
And they played timeless peasant cube.
Oh Christ!
So not sure
So
when
we'll
we're gonna
never
get
see
14
some of them
people
again.
again.
That's so that's such a cursed sentence.
And while that was happening, 8 people from the server, myself and Teld included, were playing remember Among Us? We played Among Us yesterday, where I officially learned that Teld is sus. Has always been sus, apparently. But I also realized other people are way better at that game than I am. I suck.
See, the problem is when you play Among Us, when you play with friends, is that they know your habits and they know that I do nothing but talk. And so when I'm without the imposter, suddenly there was like, why is Teld
when you're
being
not
so quiet?
talking so much.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
Well,
noticed
why
that
is-
yesterday, but I was already dead, so I couldn't say anything. I must have died first in like 75% of the games we played.
Oh yeah, I saw you and had to murder you. It had been like the third game in a row you'd been the first one dead, and I just like, all right.
My girlfriend was watching and she's like, do they just like not like you or something? And I was like, I don't think they do. Anyway, we host tons of scheduled drafts throughout the week, including our Peasant Cube on Saturday nights, the mainline Jank Diver Cube on Sunday nights, F&M style drafts on Fridays where our players vote on a cube to play, as well as various guest cubes created by members of our server throughout the week. So there's always plenty to do. You can check out our socials on Twitter at JankDiverGaming, on YouTube at youtube.com/JankDiverGaming, and you can find Teld streaming on twitch.tv/TeldTalks. And also, I've gotten a hankering. I think I'm going to try out this TikTok thing. I think it's like prime time to try out this whole TikTok
Did
thing.
they officially ban it? Did that happen?
Yeah, that's the joke. Yeah.
Marvel Snap also got caught in the
I
crossfire.
saw that.
My understanding is that like the parent company of the parent company of the parent company of Marvel Snap is like invested in a small amount in there. So basically they had no idea that they were the Second Dinner, the company that actually makes Marvel Snap, apparently had no idea that they were connected to it. And so currently it's banned in the US. Yeah, which is wild because people are, you like they have the season pass and stuff that people buy, myself included. And so, it's just like, they're trying to figure out how to get that resolved. But yeah, currently Marvel Snap is unplayable in the United States.
That is pretty fucking wild.
It is crazy. Yeah, the snappers on Twitch or on Twitter are not happy about
The
that.
snap,
as you can
Jesus, the
imagine.
snappers.
I don't know. I don't know. I'm sure they don't call them that. I just kind of said that, but
Yeah, absolutely could not care less about the flavor of that game because like I'm not into Marvel, but the gameplay is actually really fun. So if it ever comes back, I do recommend trying it. It's a cool mobile game. It works better than Arena does on mobile.
So yeah, let's go ahead and get into some actual cube discussion. So we're going to talk about the evolution of white today. Not so much. Well, I guess the point of this episode was not to talk about the downfall of white or what's going on with white right now, though that's obviously going to.
We'll talk about that at the end. We'll just kind of touch on some of it, but yeah.
Yeah, it's going to weave into this, but part of what prompted us to talk about this was that white is currently in a little bit of trouble in our mainline cube. At least white aggro is, and that prompted a discussion about, hey, let's go ahead and just talk about white. But we don't necessarily want to do another episode, like we did a couple last year on like, oh, blue sucks, but now blue's suddenly good. Red sucks, now red's suddenly good. So we're instead going to frame this as the evolution of white. Where was white, like 10 years ago versus where is white now? And obviously, to kind of frame that, our single card discussion should be a white card, right? And I know I have notes in the show notes here, but you guys know we're talking about white. We have to talk about the whitest card of all, right? We're going to obviously talk about white from AFR, right?
Oh,
One in a black for a 3/2
Christ.
enters the battlefield tapped, and when it's dealt damage, it makes a 2/2 zombie creature token. It's got to be the whitest card in Magic,
knowing Tim is generally delightful, but not in moments like this.
All right.
I appreciate the terrible joke.
The actual card is I mean we didn't talk about beforehand, but I think Elite Spellbinder is just a good card to plug here because it might be just like, I think it's like the perfect white card in terms of like what white is doing these days. You could probably find other examples that fall in line, but I think Elite Spellbinder is just a good card to plug here. And it's not that we're going to say very much about Spellbinder that people don't already know so much as just like what makes this card good in the context of white. You know, being a evasive beater that also disrupts your opponent's game plan is kind of like perfect in white. I mean, is there a white deck that you either wouldn't or couldn't put Elite Spellbinder in? I don't think so. I think you can just kind of like, it's not optimal in certain decks, but it will always carry some sort of weight, even if you're just like hard blue-white control or something like that. I feel like you could just slot a Spellbinder in as a 22nd or 23rd card and it'll play perfectly fine there.
Yeah, so I think there are certain configurations of like green white and black white that are not super interested in it, but like you said, it's just such an effective card that you probably will always play it. And of course, the most powerful thing about the card is that when you play it, you get to see PV's face on your table. You know, it's
PV's probably really proud of this one. Like, this is actually just,
he should be,
because they don't hit on the they haven't hit on the what do they call them, showcase cards or spotlight cards. Like, they haven't hit on them super hard. Like, Duelist of the Mind is fine in certain places.
Yeah, I mean, Fairy Mastermind and Elite Spellbinder feel like definitely the best two of this effect of the recent ones. But
let me actually read the card real quick, just in case the name is a little vague. Elite Spellbinder, that could be like 50 magic cards. So we're talking about the Strixhaven card. Elite Spellbinder is 2 and a white for a 3/1 flying. It's a human cleric at rare, and when it enters the battlefield, you look at target opponent's hand. You may exile a non-land from it, and for as long as it remains exiled, the owner may play it, but they have to pay 2 extra generic mana to cast that card. So 3/1 flyer for 3, not good enough on its own, but when you staple on kind of a taxation effect to it, suddenly it actually justifies itself. So this is beaten in the air. It's throwing your opponent off curve. A lot of times you'll see a game kind of decided, like especially white aggro deck. If you go 1/2 Elite Spellbinder, that's like exactly what you want to be doing. You follow up with anything on 4 while taking away your opponent's wrath or their important interactive piece. Like, you can really carry games off the back of a Spellbinder.
Yeah, just getting to come down and disrupt your opponent's curve, in considering how tight the lists are these days. A lot of times it's just a game-winning effect. The 3/1 flyer like clocks your opponent very quickly. It's great alongside additional disruption. So, you know, one of the big advantages of these like white effects like this that we're starting to get is that they play so well together. So, you know, you can stack them with things like Reprieve, Mana Tithe, Aven Interrupter, though we're not currently on that one, and you know, Quench style effects, because they have to pay more to begin with, which opens them up to getting blown out by these cards. One of the big advantage of it too, and it doesn't come up a ton anymore because we're not on too many of these, but if you ever hit a Shark Typhoon or like a Starnheim Unleashed with this card, it is backbreaking because you can no longer do the thing with those cards. I know Shark Typhoon, correct me if I'm wrong with Starnheim, you have to have it in your hand to foretell it, correct?
I mean, that would make sense to me. Yeah.
Yeah, you can only foretell from your hand.
Right. So if you don't foretell it on 2 and then you Spellbinder them and hit the Starnheim, like they suddenly it makes a 4/4 angel for 6 mana, which is like not very good.
But the opposite of that is it also triggers your opponent's Prosper, right? Because they're casting something from exile.
Yeah.
So.
Sure.
Serious downgrade.
Yeah, Shark Typhoon is like actually unplayable if you hit it with. I mean, that card's on its last limbs, but Shark Typhoon is unplayable if you hit it with a Spellbinder. Most of the 4 and 5 mana cards that you could be hitting too, those like, you know, Prosper is a lot less exciting on 6 mana, but really the 5 mana cards that tend to be like the cards that get you back into the game, you're never going to get to cast them. So I also like that we've talked about Blue's evolution and how you don't have to interact as much on the first couple of turns, which I think we're scaling back a little bit on that just because the curves are pushing lower. Partly, I think, because Blue was evolving in this like cheap, disruptive way. But if you play, you know, you've got your Spellbinder on 3 and then you start holding up the like, I'm going to counterspell and interact and do my flash thing in your like blue-white or Bant flash decks or like your blue-based control decks. Spellbinder's just a perfect spot because you can keep your opponent from playing their best card on the turn you cast it, and now you've got a clock in play and can start holding up your interaction to be more effective. So just all around, I actually think the card is at its best in aggressive decks and control decks, funny enough. Like, I think it's a little weaker in like the synergy decks and the mid-range decks, but it's still a very good card. You're just pretty much always going to make your deck, but it's actually been kind of very good. I don't want to say elite in control.
It has, Elite Spellbinder is like, I started seeing blue-white control lists 3-0ing that contain this card, and this was before, occasionally like you see something working, or at least I'm like this. Like I get so locked into paradigms mentally that when I see things that subvert those paradigms, my initial gut reaction is not like, oh, the paradigm is being subverted, maybe I need to recalibrate how I think about this. My initial gut reaction is like, well, this doesn't make any sense to me. This looks wrong. This was a bad decision, and you won in spite of it. We've mentioned on an earlier episode of the podcast that we've seen a shift in, and trust me, it's an effective shift because it's working for a playgroup, to control decks like killing you with 3 drops instead of 6 drops. And basically getting onto the board earlier and then controlling the game from there instead of controlling the game up until the point that they land like Torrential Gearhulk or whatever. And Spellbinder is really good in those decks. It's evasive when it's backed up with removal. It's 3 power in the air, so if they play like a flying blocker that can deal with it, you can just remove it. And also, one of the things that happens when you're playing Spellbinder in like a more aggressive deck is if you draw it later, your opponent is on enough mana that the disruption isn't really meaningful, right? Because they can just pay for it anyway, and it doesn't disrupt their curve or their ability to double spell or whatever. But one of the things that's nice about playing it in a control deck is if you have like a taxation style counterspell that's not like a hard counterspell, the fact that they have to pay more for the effect later keeps your kind of like quenchy type cards or your mana leaks, if you're on those, effective longer. And then obviously if you're playing control and you have to decide what to counter, what not to counter, knowing what's in your opponent's hand is great. Spellbinder is actually sort of the perfect card for us to do the, and I think we're burying the lead a little bit talking about some of the things that we're talking about with it here, because correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but is Spellbinder the first like white card where you could look at your opponent's hand? It might not be.
I think was DMU came out first, right? So there's the 3/3. I know there's the 3/3 vigilance in that form. It was like this card without flying, and it had 3 toughness.
I think DMU might have actually been after Strixhaven, because Strixhaven is old now.
You're talking about Anointed something or another, but
yeah.
Strixhaven came out in 2021.
No, yeah, you're right, because Strixhaven is no longer in Standard and DMU currently is. So yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So, I mean, I mentioned earlier, like, looking at your opponent's hand is really good in control decks because it kind of allows you to plan, okay, like, I'm not going to counter this even though I want to because I can't beat that other thing that I know I need to counter. In a white deck, and we'll talk about this maybe a little bit later, but white of the 3 aggressive colors in our cubes is the color that has a spread of cards that, like, wreck it the hardest. You know, like, white definitely suffers from getting wrathed way harder than black or red do right now. Mm-hmm. So there are certain cards that, like, your white aggressive deck is just not going to beat, wraths being, like, the most brutal of them. And Spellbinder not only disrupting that wrath, but also letting you know that it's going to come down later, so maybe you don't play into it as hard. Hand information is good, right? Disruption is good, flying is good, white has a lot of ways to anthem creatures and put +1/+1 counters on creatures, which is obviously very good on flying bodies. This card's just insane. It's very good. And it also, I think, was sort of what the harbinger of some changes into the things that white can do.
Yeah, I think one of the other things, too, that's low-key good about this card is when you turn your opponent's, like, really efficient 1 or 2 mana removal spell into something that's going to time walk them to cast it, you know, it just, like, really breaks up their ability to double spell, which is, of course, one of the most powerful things you can be doing in Magic. Like, not being able to play 2/2 drops, like, not being able to play your removal spell plus a 2-mana creature, instead of having to spend your entire turn doing the removal spell, is a pretty big tempo hit, even if it means that they get to still cast the card on their next turn. Mm-hmm. So they just, even the floor on this card tends to be pretty good, like just hitting some random card in their hand that breaks up their ability to play really efficient Magic.
Mm-hmm. And the best hits are when you see the wrath from your opponent, but you actually get to take a different card, right? Like if Elite Spellbinder is the only creature on board, like maybe they dealt with your 2-drop or something, and you play Spellbinder on 3, and you see Toxic Deluge in their hand, but you also see like Infernal Grasp. A lot of times in that position, I'll just take the Infernal Grasp, tax that by 2 mana and then, ask the question, are you going to deluge my Spellbinder? Like, I know about your deluge. I can play around it a little bit better. Deluge is a little harder to play around than like a Damnation or something like that. But like sometimes you don't even have to take the Wrath if you know about the Wrath. You can take something else and then play around the Wrath. Though a lot of times, like, the thing you are hoping to do in the white aggressive deck is actually just overcharge a Wrath effect so that you can commit for the next couple turns and try to wrap up. But yeah, information, pretty big deal. It's the reason I hate getting Thoughtseize is not necessarily because my opponent takes a card, but it's because they know about my hand. Like, they can craft an entire game plan around the other 4 or 5 cards in my hand, and Spellbinder makes me feel the same way, even if you're not going down a card, right?
Yeah.
And it's definitely an effect that scales up too, right? Like, the better better that you are as a player, or, the person playing the Elite Spellbinder is as a player, the more you're going to be able to do with that information, right? That's why Thoughtseize, I remember a comment made by some pro player, I forget who said it, when Thoughtseize was in Standard, of like, the most ridiculous thing about Thoughtseize is it basically gives pros like an extra 5% edge or something, because, when a pro player knows their opponent's hands, it's just, they're going to play perfectly because they have perfect information.
Yeah, and it's a flyer, which we'll discuss this as being kind of among White's problems currently a little bit later, but Red can get you almost dead and then draw into burn if you stabilize. Black can get you almost dead and then just like grind you out even if you stabilize with recursive creatures and sort of drain effects. White's only reach, quote unquote reach, really is that there will be no point in the game where you can completely block their incoming creature damage, and flying is pretty much the only way to do that. So this is just an all-around great card. It's one of the all-time 3-drops, which is saying something because they incessantly...
Probably the most competitive slot on the curve.
It's just so overstuffed. Like, we've literally seen sets where they print multiple rare white 3-drops that are worthy of consideration in the same set.
Yeah, this is, in my opinion, one of the untouchable ones in Urcube. I think this is probably just, like, in a vacuum better than the majority of the other 3s, which are also good cards, so... Yeah, Spellbinder is fantastic. I wish they would explore this space a little bit more. It felt like when this came out in Strixhaven that they were like pushing White a little bit into this taxation territory a little bit more, but I don't feel like we've gotten too much in that vein. I mean, you said Strixhaven came out in what, 2021, 2022 or something like that?
Yeah, almost 4 years old now.
Yeah, I guess we've seen like Aven Interrupter, we've seen Reprieve, but outside of stuff like that, like how much of this...
Invasion of Gobakon...
I do think there's an element of they're probably wanting to be careful with it. This is sort of the treasure conversation that we had last night playing, like, I think it was during Among Us. But basically, it's like treasures by themselves aren't necessarily bad. Like, treasure making isn't inherently bad. But when you start stacking the ability to have a bunch of them up, it becomes kind of problematic. And I could see a world where, imagine you have a couple of 2-drops that do something like this, and you've got your Aven Interrupter, your Elite Spellbinder, your Mana Tithe, and like suddenly your opponent just doesn't get to play the game because so many of these effects exist.
Yeah.
Now, for cubers, that doesn't really matter, right? Because we can selectively curate what we want, and so we can make sure we don't include too many of those effects. But in terms of the broader Magic ecosystem, there's probably some incentive to not have too much of this effect, especially cheap versions of this effect.
Mm-hmm. I could see that. It makes sense that, yeah, that actually makes sense. We see like maybe one card in this vein like every 3 sets, 4 sets or something like that. They probably don't want too many of them stacking up, though. If they're all 3-drops, like, I don't actually see that being a problem. I think it's more when you go like Thalia into Spellbinder into who knows, whatever other taxation effects are out there in like an Eternal format, maybe that's when it becomes a problem. But that is part of White's identity, so I would like to see more. I mean, we talked about that, what is it, Tax Collector card on the Peasant episode. There's this 2-drop that came out last year that we don't have on Arena, but it feels like it plays in this space, feels like something we could play in our mainline cube if we got it. It's a 2-mana 2/2 that when it enters the battlefield, you can choose one of the modes is your opponent's spells cost 1 more to cast during their next turn, and then it has an alternative mode of detaining a permanent or a non-land permanent or something like that, so it has a little bit of functionality if you don't need to tax your opponent. But that into like Spellbinder or into some sort of other, like you have Reprieve up, it does feel like your opponent might not get to play the game, which I can kind of see how stacking that all together could be problematic in like a constructed environment. Main topic time.
Yeah, let's do it.
Chris, I'm gonna lean on you a little bit. This is a topic that I think you wanted to talk about. I think we're also gonna pitch this as kind of a mini series going forward. We're not gonna necessarily jump right into blue, black, so on and so forth. But like we will probably talk about the evolution of other colors down the line, and of course we are gonna talk about like the state of white to some degree in our current cube, where white aggro is not at its best. But for the most part, we're gonna frame this as, you know, where is white at now versus where white used to be in a cube setting. We're going to have to go outside the boundary of our own cube because our cube has existed for 5 years, and we should probably talk a little bit beyond that and, like, you know, traditional white in, you know, stuff like the vintage cube and stuff like that. But for the most part, we're going to talk about, you know, like what's white doing today that it couldn't do before? What does white need to be doing, you know, to keep up to snuff with other colors? So, Chris, I don't know if you had a specific place you wanted to start this conversation off with.
Well, let's go ahead and talk about like what white has sort of, and by the way, when we use the word traditional, I think what we really mean is we're going to be talking about like what white looked like back when the vintage cube was like the vintage cube that people remember. Like what white was doing constructed, let's call it like pre-Ixalan.
Pre-arena?
Yeah, pre-arena, like pre-arena white. That's actually a very good way to put it, right? So pre-arena white, the classic deck was, and I'm sure we've all as Magic players heard this term, is like white weenie. You just played your little shitters, Savannah Lions being the classic, just a 2-1 for 1, and you smork. You know, in Vintage Cube, it was try to blast off some like stupid fast mana into like Hero of Bladehold. And it's still, I think, at its core an aggressive color, but it's an aggressive color with like some new tricks and some really ridiculously powered up options. So there's like Ocelot Pride, which I'm gonna have to look up the exact text on this card. It's a 1/1 first strike lifelink, which is insane in white because white has like some like going Ocelot Pride into Luminarch Aspirant is just like a good way to win a game. And then at the beginning of your end step, if you gain life this turn, you make a 1/1 white cat creature token. And then if you have the City's Blessing from Ixalan, for each token you control at enter the battlefield this turn, you make another one. This card's insane. Guide of Souls is another Modern Horizons 3 mistake that generates energy when you play creatures, and then you can spend energy to make your creatures huge and have flying. Anyway, traditional was just like smork it, and it didn't really have any card advantage, and it didn't really do anything particularly interesting. It was just kind of try to curve out and win. It's always been a control support color. I mean, with the really, really basic stuff, which is just like Wrath of God and Swords to Plowshares. They have printed some really insane white Wraths recently. Sunfall being an example of that. Sunfall was like the 5 mana exile all creatures, and then you create an incubate token that's the size of however many creatures got exiled, which is just a silly card. If you're playing a power maxed cube and you're not concerned about field ads, like try Sunfall. It's dumb.
Yeah, Sunfall, like most of the time I think Rats are quite bad, but the brief period of time we played Sunfall, I would consider Sunfall probably the single best card in the entire cube.
Yeah, I would say in my control decks these days, I probably want like a max of 2. And honestly, if we had access to like all of the good cantrips like Ponder, Preordain, like I might honestly start my control deck off with like 1, with the expectation that if I need it, that I will dig for it really hard.
Yeah, I'm generally still of the belief that you probably should be in the 0 to 1 Wrath category starting out. I think just game 1, you want to be able to be a little more proactive, have a little more unless, I guess it depends, right? Because like we did just recently cut Aclazotz, but cards like the Scarab God and Quintorius make me more interested in playing Wrath of Gods because you can Wrath into those cards, and those are cards that will just single-handedly carry games if you untap with them. So the like 4 or 5 curve there is actually quite powerful. But most of the time, I think I'm interested in a limited number of Wraths, at least in blue-white specifically, because I think that has pretty good catch-up mechanics. We've seen Damnation show up a decent amount in control decks. It looks like a lot of them now are playing some number of Wraths, but it kind of just depends on your creature density ultimately. It looks like, you know, I think the green decks are powerful enough at this point that you're probably supposed to be on a Wrath, but like I really am looking for an excuse to cut down to 0 in game 1 if I have the tools to do so, just because there are some matchups where Wraths are just really not very good.
And one point I want to make here about, you know, distinction between 10 years ago versus now is we're still playing the same white Wraths. Outside of Sunfall, there aren't that many,
farewell,
if any, white Wraths that are better or comparable to Wrath of God and what's the other one? Day of Judgment, right? 4 mana, just straight up sweeper. So like Wraths haven't really gotten better, but answers to Wraths and sticky threats and indestructible creatures and recursive creatures have all gotten better. So the Wraths, despite being the same exact cards, have just faded over time a little bit, to the point where it's like, I don't know if they can just print 4 mana exile all creatures, something like that. But it's clear that like there's a really hard line between Wraths of old and overpowered Wraths like Sunfall, and even Farewell to some extent is not a particularly fun card to have in an environment. It's also a 6 mana Wrath, so it's not even effective in some matches. So the Wraths have not changed is the problem. And I want to piggyback off of this for a point I was going to bring up later, but it seems appropriate now if we're talking about white as a control support with its single target removal. I did something. I went through the Vintage Cube because I think the Vintage Cube is another good place to kind of see like where things are at versus where things were. And I listed out all of the single target white removal spells in the Vintage Cube. And I'm going to read these off real quick. I'm not going to read the effect of every single card, but I'm going to read these off, and I want you to tell me if you notice something about them. Okay, so the white removal in the Vintage Cube, you have the top tier stuff like Swords to Plowshares, Path to Exile, and Solitude. And then you have kind of everything else that's like fine to not very good. You have Council's Judgment, you have Oust, you have Palace Jailer, Portable Hole, Prismatic Endin, Sheltered by Ghosts from Duskmourn, which we're actually trying out very recently in our own cube. And then you have some pretty weak ones like Touch the Spirit Realm, Unexpectedly Absent, and Winds of Abandon. I don't know if it jumps out to you right away, but do you notice anything about like that just whole package of white removal spells?
The vast majority of them were printed a million years ago.
Exactly. Like the only card I listed there that was printed last year was Sheltered by Ghosts. And I wouldn't even say Sheltered by Ghosts is an all-timer because it's like a very creature-specific kind of removal spell. It's got that Banisher Priest style removal that can backfire. But compare that to red offerings from just last year. Galvanic Discharge, Ghostfire Slice, Scorching Shot, Torch the Witness, Chainsaw. That's 5 red removal spells that are all like high quality that came out last year, and white did not get anything like that. Maybe the last like clean white removal spell we got that I think is like eminently cubable was Ossification from like 2023. Like they're not pushing white removal. Like they're still printing here is a Doomblade with downside, right? Which it's like fine.
I do think Get Lost is actively very good because I think giving your opponent 2 map tokens is pretty minimal downside for the amount of flexibility that card gets.
Yeah, my point being that like it's the removals in like this paradigm where even 10 years later it's still kind of like, okay, we have Swords to Plowshares from the early days. That's obviously like a design mistake, but whatever, it was alpha. But white still has this kind of mentality that its removal needs to be worse than other colors. So like the Wraths have not gotten better, and some removal spells have kind of like eked their way in. You see them playing around with like Banish and Lights these days and kind of tweaking that formula a little bit, but white removal's not getting so much better. So like I don't know that white control has necessarily gotten better over time if all the same cards we were playing 10 years ago are still the same cards we're playing today, unless of course I mean Solitude is just a broken card, so that like that's in the conversation of ways to push white control, but all the best white control removal spells are also just good in other white decks. So like white is support all the way and kind of always has been, but it's not necessarily getting better as a support color.
I do want to push back ever so slightly on that and say I do want to shout out 2 cards from Duskmourn that I think are a good signal that we're perhaps going to get better cards. Is Unidentified Hovership. That's the white one for a 2/2 vehicle with flying.
Yeah, that one's cool.
And it's a Banisher Priest, but if your opponent ever taps out, you can turn one token of a 1/1 token into 2 flying damage. So you can, get chipping some damage there, and they don't get their card back. They get a Manifest Dread, which is good, but not nearly as good as whatever you took, presumably. And then the other one is Exercise, which is more of a role player, but It's seen the consolidation of several different effects. So Exercise is a sorcery for 1 and a white, and it exiles target artifact, enchantment, or creature with power 4 or greater. And so we've seen like Destroy Evil, for example, which could destroy a creature with 4 or greater toughness or an enchantment. We saw, various ones that could kill an artifact or an enchantment. And so we've seen these different effects, but Exercise does combine like all of those effects into one on top of giving you the exile to get around cards like Aclazotz, which we did just cut. But still, any of those larger, sticky, recursive creatures, if they exist, you can get rid of them. It lets you get rid of the big green creatures relatively efficiently on top of stuff like Great Hinge. So I think that's a good sign moving forward that they're trying to push the removal a little bit to keep up with the power creep of threats. Now, of course, that does end up in the arms race, and we could talk about this on a different episode, but the arms race between removal and threats is just constantly ongoing. And so the removal gets better, the threats get better, the removal gets better, the threats get better.
Yeah, it's true. Another sort of traditional effect that white has had is taxation, stacks, hate bears, whatever you want to call it. Hate bears is a reference to there being a lot of cards historically that are like a 2. They're literally they're a bear. They're a 2/2 for 2 that has some disruptive effect. And Spellbinder and Invasion of Gobakon and like these effects don't really fall into that category. A very classic example is Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, which is a 2/1 first strike for 2 that basically makes any non-creature spell cost 1 additional mana. This is not like pure white, but another like really classic example of a hate bear is a green-white card called Gaddock Teague, a very old classic card. It's a green and a white for a 2/2. Non-creature spells with converted mana cost 4 or greater can't be cast, which includes the vast majority of Wraths and a lot of powerful Planeswalkers. And non-creature spells with X in their mana cost can't be cast. So, like, if this was on the battlefield and you were, playing against a traditional blue-white control deck, like, they wouldn't be able to cast, like, Secure the Wastes or Wrath of God. So this is kind of traditionally, like, Hate Bears was a deck in some constructed format for a long time. Somebody just added in Containment Priest, Spirit of the Labyrinth. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure, I'll talk about it. I mean, we don't run most of these here, but I think the problem these effects have ran into recently is that the majority of them are kind of designed to be good into largely unfair things.
Yeah.
So like Containment Priest is a very, very powerful card. But if you expect 90% of the time or 99% of the time, people are just going to cast spells and resolve cards, a card like Containment Priest is not as good. Spirit of the Labyrinth is the card that restricts players to only drawing 1 card per turn. And that's really good if everybody's trying to draw a bunch of cards. But in the modern era, a lot of this value is generated through tokens, through board presence, through exile draw, through these different sorts of effects that get around this. And just in general, these sort of taxing Thalia, Esper, Sentinel effects are at their best versus unfair things or into control decks. And so the kind of creature-centric Magic that we're playing these days, a lot of these hate bearers aren't currently designed with that in mind. One of the examples I would say of one that does would be the second Thalia. Is it Heretic Cathar?
Heretic Cathar, yeah.
Yeah, and it's a little understated at this point. It's a 3-mana, 3/2 first striker, but it makes your opponent's artifacts and non-basic lands and creatures come into play tapped. Mm-hmm. And so that one's pretty good as far as like.
I still think that one's decent, actually.
Solid, yeah, solid card.
Yeah, but like what we need to see from these cards moving forward for them to be good for us specifically is more good against creature decks and less good against spell effects, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Blue-white has some weird ones that are like either like your opponents can't cast spells for more mana than they have lands, or players can't cast spells that they didn't pay mana for or whatever. This is just illustrating your point a little bit more, Teld. Like they're really good bullets into weird constructed stuff. Leonin Arbiter is a card. It's 1 and a white for a 2/2. Players can't search libraries. Any player may pay 2 mana to ignore this effect until end of turn. So this kind of shits on like fetch lands and tutors and stuff like that. They're generally pretty specific, and not only that, but like really leaning hard into the players don't get to do stuff in like a really defined sense is probably not a good way to make white aggressive decks fun to play against. But that's something that they've sort of traditionally done. And then like one other note with and I'd like for you guys to talk about this a little bit more. But white has traditionally, and this was true for basically every color that wasn't blue or black for a while, and basically every color gets to do it now. But white didn't used to have like card advantage at all, which sort of meant like if you played into a Wrath, you just sort of lost the game on the spot because you had no way to rebuild.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, this is like the result of Commander, right? Like white getting card
Yeah.
advantage was initially kind of a complaint among white Commander players that they couldn't draw cards.
Yeah, I accredit white I think white is a good card advantage color these days. It's arguably comparable to whatever the other best card draw colors are or whatever, just because there's so many cantrips and, you know, things like Wedded Announcement exist now that can draw you cards over time and stuff like that. They've really gone out of their way to make sure white has some sort of card advantage that's not just like generating tokens or something like that. It used to be that like in Vintage Cube, your white card advantage card was land tax, you know, like you were trying to generate virtual card advantage by just thinning a bunch of lands out of your deck, which is not really the card advantage that you necessarily want to keep up with, you know, like a blue deck that can actually just draw cards. But there was this period of time, I don't remember exactly, but there was this period of time in Limited especially where white was just the worst color, like set after set after set. It was like Modern Horizons 1, I believe M19 was like notorious for white being absolutely terrible. And then there were like 2 or 3 other surrounding sets. War of the Spark, white was terrible there. And it's just like, white's really bad. Why is white really bad? And it compounded with the Commander conversation that white was the worst color in Commander. And, you know, if you know anything about modern day design, it's that Commander influences a lot of decision making.
Too much, frankly.
And card design. Possibly too much, you know, a conversation for the Commander Tank episode number 38 perhaps, but for here, like, yeah, they made a conscious effort to start increasing white's access to card draw as a direct response specifically to Commander, and as a result, I think the result of that, whether you believe, you know, Commander has too much influence or not, the direct result I think is very positive, and white decks now do have actual card advantage that they just never could have dreamed of having 10 years ago. It used to be that the white weenie deck, if your opponent wrathed your white weenie deck and you were in top deck mode, you basically lose the game, right? Because you have no way to do anything other than draw like a Savannah Lions off the top of your library and just cast it and hope your opponent doesn't do anything.
Yeah, and white's card advantage these days tends to be creature based, and it usually has something to do with like resolving small creatures. Yeah.
Well, even as far back as Alara, we've had the infinite stream of Elspeths that would, and Gideons that were kind of the solution to this, right? You know, every Gideon Planeswalker turns into a dude you can smork with, and every Elspeth Planeswalker makes tokens for you to keep playing into Wraths.
So yeah, well, you've always had board presence. Yeah. Like White's always had access to like continued board presence, but I'm talking like literal drawing cards. Yeah, like which it can do now. It can definitely do that now. I mean, you even get pretty good card like Spirited Companion. I think was a big get for white and kind of pushed the. I think the first card that actually came out that was like Wizards saying, "Hey, we're going to do this in white now," was Priest of Forgotten Lore in AFR is like a 3-mana 2/1 that drew a card when it entered the battlefield, and like that's not a good card by today's standards, right? It wasn't even that good when it came out, but it was like, hey, white just has this random cantrip creature, what can we do with that moving forward? And then we got Spirited Companion, 2-mana, one, basically Elvish Mystic in white, and we also got Inspiring Overseer, which was just a super power crept version of that priest, and now we're getting things like Tenacious, Enduring Innocence, not Tenacious, it's Enduring Innocence, and we've always had things like the Welcome in Vampire and stuff like that, and they iterate on that a lot, where it's like these 3-mana cards that can kind of produce these draw engines with small creatures. Split Skin Doll as an example of another really good cantrip creature that I suggest people try out in their, you know, white kind of mid-rangey aggro decks and stuff like that. So yeah, the point here being white wasn't able to draw cards 10 years ago, and it is actually one of the fronts where white has improved significantly in modern day.
Yeah, I think it's really surprising to me in a way that on our client, like, we don't just have a blue 2-mana on-curve creature that draws a card, right? Or we don't have like Watcher for Tomorrows or anything like that. It's kind of wild because like that's just insane to me that blue has a worse card draw 2-drop setup than white. I mean, granted, like cards like Kitza and Malcolm are extremely powerful, but they loot, they don't generate raw card advantage, and white just has those now. Like white's starting to get cards like that are just like fine aggressive 2-drop creatures that also generate card advantage. So I'm wondering when blue's going to get. It's supposed to be the card draw color. Like when is blue getting the split skin doll? Right.
Yeah, I mean, the Split Skin Gall does ask something of your deck,
Very little,
but
but
yeah,
yes.
but yeah, no. I take your point. I guess what I'm saying, and this is a discussion maybe like for a different venue, but I'm fine with white having like ETB draw creatures and blue generating card advantage or like hand smoothing in a different sort of
Yeah,
way.
I am fine too. It's not like blue is struggling or anything. This
No.
is more just this is more like a color pie
Mhm.
sort of concern rather than anything specifically related to power.
Gotcha. Two other things I wanted to touch on real quick. White traditionally has had powerful planeswalkers in the 4-drop slot. A lot of old planeswalkers have fallen off, like Jace the Mind Sculptor has really not impressed us, and I never thought that that's a thing that I would say, but like Jace the Mind, given its pedigree, but Jace the Mind Sculptor in blue has like really not impressed us very much at all.
Chad holds up though.
Gideon
That's
Gideon Ally as Zendikar is still fucking awesome. A classic example. And Elspeth's Son's Champion is a very old card that has proven to still be a very solid top-end finishing card for white mid-range and controlling decks.
Yeah, I've heard actually unbeatable used to describe that card.
Yeah. Elspeth's Son's Champion is kind of like a Grave Titan, kind of an example of like a Grave Titan style effect, where it's like if you're playing in a deck that needs to get through for damage, ironically, it's probably one of the most punishing cards against small ball white decks, and it is white. Just because, what in God's name are you supposed to do into 3 tokens every turn?
But what if your Grave Titan could also Wrath of God?
Yeah. And then, this is a very, very, very different format of Planeswalkers. Probably one of the most unique Planeswalkers of all time, but, the Wandering Emperor is carrying on that sort of proud tradition of white Planeswalkers being very strong. And then, I think in terms of themes, it is caring about enchantments, being this has traditionally been a green-white thing, green-white enchantress, but white is usually providing the majority of the really powerful effects for that archetype. White caring about enchantments entering the battlefield has sort of been a traditional archetype. It's definitely, in my opinion, if you're doing a quote-unquote traditional cube where you're trying to have a lot of cross synergies and overlap, is extremely parasitic, but it is a thing.
I was just going to say these sort of artifact and enchantress sort of themes can be really fun in a tightly designed cube where these are supported synergies. I think these are some of the most fun things you can actually do for drafters when you're designing a cube. If you really want one that just gets your drafters thinking, put artifact and enchantment themes, or one or the other, or both potentially, in your cube, and let your drafters figure out how to Rube Goldberg machine value and aggression out of it. And it just is it's a super fun fiddly thing to do, but if you're just trying to power max, it doesn't really get there.
Yeah, exactly. So white we're going to talk, and I think white has received kind of fewer new themes, and it has kind of gotten new tricks at doing stuff it's traditionally sort of done. But you guys want to highlight some kind of modern day white themes that are emerging?
Yeah, I mean, some of them are niche. So you talked about artifacts and enchantresses, right? That stuff is usually pretty parasitic unless they're open-ended artifact payoffs that you could just put in any deck. I can't even think of one in our mainline cube that we would run, but you see it in Vintage Cube, kind of, with things like Retrofitter Foundry and a Tolarian Academy. Sometimes you can get these white cards going along with those, but it's really the artifacts and blue cards that are carrying the weight there. And then you have things like My Affinity Cube, but that's obviously just designed around artifacts, so there's nothing really parasitic going on there. I think Blink is something worth mentioning. I think, again, Commander players love Blink, so they made Blink good. This tends to be more of a sub-theme within a cube. We were actually playing a Soul Herder kind of style deck in our blue. Yeah, it package is exactly the right word. It wasn't if you were going to go into blue-white, you could still do blue-white control, but there were enough cards seated in that you could do some sort of Soul Herder thing. Mm-hmm. Restoration Angel's actually still in the cube, but that's just a good card. I think this really took off with the printing of Ephemerate in Modern Horizons 1. Before that, your blink options were things like Cloud Shift, just one shot, blink a thing, use a spell to hopefully get ETB value. But Ephemerate really, I think, broke the mold. Ephemerate's kind of a broken card for a common, and I think people just didn't realize it right away. But, like, if you do get full value off of Ephemerate, which is blink a creature and then rebound, blink another creature on your upkeep for a single white mana, like, if you get 2 ETBs, God forbid you, like, blank an opponent's removal spell, you can really go off. But obviously, like, that's maximized in some sort of blink shell that's using maybe Teleportation Circle or some other like mass blink type card like Lysel's Acrobatics or Eerie Interlude or whatever.
Or a way to pick up spells out of the graveyard so that you can do the loopy tricks.
Sure, yeah. A lot of ways you can go about it. We've reached a point in our cube where we were cutting enough stuff, like we cut Soul Herder, we were cutting enough ETB creatures for different types of value creatures or aggro creatures that it didn't feel like we were supposed to support Blink. And I don't know that it's like very heavily supported in something like the Vintage Cube, but if you play like Arena Cube when it comes around, or maybe even like Chromatic Cube or whatever they throw up there's usually some sort of like mini blink package you can put together, like this kind of cool value engine. It is a little bit more on the cute side than just like a streamlined strategy, and it usually ends up being like a package of 5, 6, 7 cards and some ETB creatures inside of like a more focused blue-white tempo deck or mid-range deck or something like that. But blink is something that white can do nowadays that it really couldn't do for lack of, good ETB creatures and actual blink spells like 10 plus years ago or whatever.
Yeah, I think one of the advantages a card like Ephemerate has, which we've, I think, finally cut it in the last update, but one of the advantages that card has is its ability to just be like you were mentioning earlier, brick or removal spell. Even if you don't cast it on an ETB creature, just, using it to blank an opponent's removal spell can sometimes be worthwhile, especially if you have another value creature in play that you can target it with on the next turn. So it's just kind of a generically fine card. I think the blink effects, though, just, I don't know. It's one of those things that players love to do. And there are times where it is extremely powerful, but I sort of feel like it most of the time doesn't work out the way you want it to. It just doesn't quite get there. And it's funny because I think some of the most powerful things you can actually blink are cards like Reflector Mage. And what people actually want to do is just make, a bunch of Blade Splicer tokens, but I'm pretty sure just Reflector Maging your opponent's board and attacking them to death is like a more powerful way to use Blink on average.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's you could do Blink in a lot of different ways depending on what ETBs you like, but like I said, I wouldn't exactly describe Blink as parasitic, because a lot of Blink cards, like if you're playing good Blink cards like Ephemerate and Restoration Angel, those have utility beyond just like, I'm going to do this specific thing with them, but it usually ends up being a sub-theme rather than a main theme.
I also think in recent times, we've seen a bit of a move away from this towards my favorite card effect, which actually requires you to respend your mana. And I actually think those are healthier effects. I think having the Skyfisher infinite number of those that we see every year, being able to having to pick up those and actually recast the mana to play it, I think it's a healthier thing than Blink, because Blink feels really miserable when your opponent actually does get to pop it off. Whereas I don't think those Skyfisher effects create quite the feels bad.
Yeah, the thing about Skyfishers is they're usually not pushed enough for high power level cubes. Like we played the cheapest one we've ever gotten was Nurturing Pixie, right? Which has apparently it's popping off in standard right now. Like there's even a Esper Pixie is the name of the deck that like is creeping up into tier 1. But like we played Pixie in our
super fun deck.
Yeah, it's a fun standard deck. The whole Skyfisher thing is really fun, but it really does feel like that peasant territory, right? And we get one of these every set. I believe it's in the like set design matrix to have a white creature or a white effect that can pick up or rebuy another permanent. So we do get one of these like literally every set, to the point where like our peasant cube, like kind of the joke is that it's oops all Skyfishers. But I mean they're just never pushed for a higher power level. Like core Skyfisher was never a card you'd really put in a mainline like vintage style cube or even our high power level cube. Not necessarily because it wouldn't work, but because of cube equity, right? It'd be fielding out something that's probably objectively more powerful. Nurturing Pixie didn't really catch our players' attention, though. I mean, there was clearly something there with a 1-mana way to pick up a thing and reuse it, but it never really caught on. So, like, I would be interested to see what a rare or mythic rare Skyfisher would look like to actually push this sort of effect into higher power level territory, but it really is like the peasant environment stuff with these Skyfishers rather than, higher power stuff. I very briefly wanted to touch on just like some key white effects, the type of things that you see. We talked about wraths already. Wraths in some capacity are like almost necessary evils. Like you need some sort of outlet in cubes to handle aggressive starts, or go wide creature starts that like single target removal can't get you out from underneath. So you usually play a couple wraths, but we already talked about how like they're not really getting better or anything like that. That said, they often do take up slots in white sections in pretty much any cube that you'll play. White has a big anthem identity, and anthems have actually gotten a lot better these days.
They have.
Intrepid Adversary is still great.
Yeah, in Intrepid Adversary, which is even like, I mean, what, 5 years old at this point? Like, Adversary, it used to be that like wraths were what? Glorious Anthem, 3 mana enchantment, +1/+1 to the board, and like that doesn't stack up, but they push them these days. You could play something like Flowering of the White Tree and give your creatures like +2/+1. But we're getting a lot of anthems attached to other effects as well, right? Like we early on in our cube career, we played Banalish Marshal, white, 3/3, gives all your other creatures +1/+1. We have better than that these days, right? We have your Tristani Discordance, your Wedded Announcements that give you value and hopefully a couple creature bodies and then turn into anthems. You mentioned Intrepid Adversary, which can be an uber anthem in the late game and is just a fine 2-drop. Part of White's identity as like a creature color is that it can actually buff up your creatures, which I think is one of Chris's selling points on Isamaru, actually, is that the second point of toughness on Isamaru actually matters a lot when you anthem your board and suddenly it's a 3 toughness creature that doesn't trade with other 2-drops and stuff like that. So
yeah, that's 100% true. The other thing, and beyond anthems, there's also like +1/+1 counter distribution. Like Luminarch Aspirant is very famous for doing this. By the way, I think we should probably just talk about like token generation and anthems at the same time, because they just go like well hand in hand. I mean, it was like released in one of those kind of weird not sets, but they're like White has cards now like Oltec Matter Weaver, which is a 3 mana 2/4 that whenever you cast a creature spell, you make a 1/1. There's just like more White ways to sort of produce tokens. Adeline makes a tapped and attacking token every time you attack. Speaking of anthems and token generation, this is kind of like a 2-in-1, and I think we were like, okay, we'll test it, and it's actually been one of White's best creatures. Sanguine Evangelist is a really good white 3-drop. It's 3 mana for a 2/1 with Battle Cry, and when it ETBs and when it dies, it makes a 1/1 black bat creature token with flying. So it makes a flying token that can anthem in addition to like all of your other small creatures. And then when it trades off, it makes another token, which is really good. We may have mentioned Wedding Announcement already. Wedding Announcement is a really powerful card that both makes bodies, draws cards, and anthems. So this is really what White does in the aggressive space that differentiates it from like black or red. Warren Warleader is kind of like a hero of Bladehold for the modern era, yada yada yada, etc., etc., etc. It's kind of one of the things that White does, and it does it better than it used to.
Yeah, I don't want to start too much of a conversation, but I do think Hero Blado probably holds up in that I don't think War Leader is super good. Maybe I'm off base on that one. But
no, you
every
might
time
be
I
right.
look at this card, I kind of just wish it would Hero Bladehold.
Well, it's funny because I asked the question, like, would we play this card if we had Hero Bladehold? And I think your initial take was that this was probably better. But now that we've played it for a while, like, I could see your position maybe evolve on that.
It feels like it's a card that reads super good, but maybe I just haven't seen it in play. It might just be that also Hero Bladehold might be bad because like 4 mana cards that don't immediately generate a ton of value or don't have protection are kind of bad. And the War Leader has the potential
Hero would be
to
that good. Because Hero has to be like, even War Leader doesn't even have, like, it gives you immediate value. You should be able to attack, but I think War Leader is more our player base has not latched onto the card because it's a 4 mana double white 4-drop or a 4-drop double white creature in white decks that don't normally want that many 4-drops.
Yeah, I do think War Leader probably suffers from the fact that, too, at the moment, we're running 3 4-mana white planeswalkers that I can almost guarantee are all better. And then we're also running Sarah Paragon that is just the premier top end for a white aggressive deck.
the classic, oh, we should probably just throw this random thing in here and see if it performs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think War Leader's better than it's like it hasn't even played out poorly. It's more that people just haven't played it, and I think it's one of those cases of like if people tried this in certain shells, I think it would be surprisingly good.
Right.
But I don't believe I've seen it in play like ever watching other people's footage, like other people's matches. So like it's hard for me to say that it's not good because like it just hasn't tested. The fact of the matter being that people just aren't inspired by the card.
Yeah.
I highly doubt Hero Blade Hold holds up though. Like 4-mana creature with an attack trigger that's arguably not even good.
I suspect you're right. Maybe that's just my nostalgia for Hero Blade Hold kicking in. Like that card was just a bomb diggity when I first started playing Magic, and just embedded right there.
It'd probably be one of those cards we test out if we actually got it. But yeah, white token making quite good these days. White doesn't quite have. I mean, I guess white gets stupid cards like a Johnny and Ocelot Pride that we've talked about. Modern Horizons 3 cards.
We just can't play them. Like some of the Modern Horizons 3 might have had more. Like, in terms of quantity, might have more broken cards in white than maybe any other color. Ocelot Pride, Guide of Souls, Felia is a really insane card. 2-mana Johnny is like one of the dumbest cards that's ever been printed. For those of you that don't know, it's a 1/2 that makes a 2/1 on ETB, and then if another cat dies, which it makes a cat, it flips into a planeswalker that makes creatures and then deals damage to things equal to the number of creatures you control, and that's not a minus. It's a really stupid card.
We would definitely play 1-mana 1/2 that made a 2/1, right? If you just full stop there, wouldn't that be just like good enough?
2-mana 1/2 that made a 2/1?
So whatever, flip flop the stats, however, but like 3 total
No,
power.
no,
and
no.
toughness
You mean
across.
you said 1-mana version of that effect?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Not one. Well, 1-mana we wouldn't play that because that'd be broken. But 2-mana, like a Johnny without any extra cat or planeswalker text is.
Oh
just
yeah, no, we'd play the
already
shit
a
out of
great
it.
card.
We'd play the shit out of it. It'd be really good.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you look, it was really funny when they had the cube data available for the Arena Cube. If I remember right, I think a Johnny, Ocelot Pride, and Guide of Souls were all in the top like 5 cards in the entire format.
Yeah, it's just irresponsible to have all that stuff in that cube in the first place. But
Well, I mean, we did it, but well, we never played a Johnny. I don't think
We never played a Johnny. We had that. We had the sense to only play Nadu.
we had the sense to only play Nadu, and then we also only had the sense to play Guide of Souls and Ocelot Pride. And then the day I was walking my dog, and I was like, "What if somebody goes like Guide of Souls into Ocelot Pride?" Yeah, then it happened, and it was really insane. Yeah, so in any case, I want to talk about some stuff that White is doing now, because like the idea behind the episode is the evolution of White, right? I want to sort of break down into some bricks, like things that White's doing now that it didn't used to do. The big one, I think, is Disruption. So you've got Invasion of Gobakon, Elite Spellbinder, and then also Anointed Peacemaker, which if over time we kind of figure out, like, hey, White's ability to do this is actually what's going to allow it to, like, win more games. That's a 3-drop we might want to consider. It's kind of like Elite Spellbinder on the ground with a better, with more stats, not a better stat line because it doesn't fly. But it's like a 3/3 Vigilance version that also taxes activated abilities of the card that you name.
Yeah, I think if we were going to introduce another one of those effects, I'd rather bring back Interrupter Aviano. I think that card is...
Yeah.
why do we have the Italian?
I don't know. It's just what I just Interrupter Aviano.
This is a card that I still like can't quite wrap my head around, that it didn't feel like it was very good, but like it.
I mean, I saw it win games.
Yeah,
I saw it win games. It's just that it's such a weirdo card that I think people were like, why would I put this in my white deck that doesn't have a ton of flash stuff in it?
Yeah, card's very, very powerful, though. It's starting to finally see constructed play, and it's like, I thought it was might be the best card in OTJ when we were doing spoiler season, and I don't think it quite played out that strongly, but I do think it's still a card that, if we wanted more of this white disruption, that's like at the very top of my list of cards that I would want to try again.
Same. I mean, I would have to hear people say that it wasn't very good, and then I also saw people like scoop to it when they tried to cast their 3-drop and they couldn't, and their opponent. Yeah,
it sort of got Force Spike Bird vibes.
Yes.
To the listener, we're referring to Aven Interrupter, which is the 3-mana 2/2 flash that can exile a spell off the stack, and the controller plots it, so they can't recast it that turn, but they can cast it for free the next turn. One note about this is it just eats a counter spell, right? It just gobbles up a counter spell because you can't plot a counter spell from exile. So I think double white hurt this card. I think it really
I agree.
I
agree.
I think if this was 1 in a white, same exact card, it would, or 2 in a white. I want to shave a mana off of everything today. If it was 2 white instead of 1 white, I think it would be significantly better. But double white in like decks that want these sort of cards actually does matter. Let's talk about Invasion of Gobakon for just a second, because this is a new addition that we added as like hey, let's try this out. We're trying to do this thing. Wow, this card really impressed when we saw it. First off, it's a 3 loyalty battle, which is as low as those get, and we talked about Elite Spellbinder as a 3 power evasive creature. Like it's not that hard to flip a 3 loyalty or 3 defense battle or whatever they're called. Especially if you're Boros, like you can just bolt it as well and it flips. So a single clean removal spell will get it flipped, and then it turns into like I think it's called a Light Shield Ray.
I just posted it.
Yeah. First off, the front side, the actual card Invasion of Gobakon does an Elite Spellbinder thing, right? You get to take a card from their hand. It costs 2 more for them to cast it as long as it remains exiled. And then once you flip the battle into Light Shield Array, it's an enchantment that gives +1/+1 to each creature that attacked on your end step. And then you can sacrifice the enchantment to give all your creatures hexproof and indestructible. So your creatures get bigger over time if they're surviving combat, and you have like a one-shot like heroic intervention type card to even just stave off a single target removal spell if you need to. A lot of things going on with that one. I'm interested to see how this plays out, because like obviously the narrative was like, oh, this card's so strong, this card's super broken, like what am I supposed to do? It kind of did play out that way, but we've had exactly 1 trial run with the card, so
people say that when they lose to it. People say that when they lose to a card that steamrolls them, but like I mean, you could make the same argument. Now, granted, this is like I guess the ceiling on this is higher, but like you could make the same claim like, oh, I kept a slow hand that was really dependent on me being able to like turn 1 Llanowar Elves and my opponent Thoughtseize me, like Thoughtseize broken, cut it from cube, kind of a thing.
Thoughtseize is, well, I mean, yes.
Thoughtseize is broken. Like, don't get me wrong.
Please cut it from the cube.
Yeah, like sometimes you lose to powerful cards. Like sometimes sometimes you lose to Chandra Torch of Defiance after your opponent like controlled your early plays. Like sometimes you lose to Counterspell. Like, I mean, there's like a difference between like this and like the Aquazot's problem, right? Like the Aquazot's problem, like I can definitely understand arguments about this where like cards come down that like invalidate everything that happened already, and it's just like, okay, well I guess the first 5 turns of the game didn't matter because now you're just gonna make me discard my whole hand while gaining tons of life. Light Shield Array is really powerful, but I think that just frankly like this is maybe the type of card that we're gonna need to include in white for, because like, sorry, I'm a little all over the place right now, but this is a very white effect. It anthems your board, it protects your board, and I think that these are the type of effects that maybe we're gonna need to include more of in white for like white aggro to be powerful, because like white aggro's biggest weakness against the controlling decks that are doing really well right now is like as a white deck, like literally everything that white does in an aggressive sense that is like stronger or more unique or whatever than the other aggro colors is all stuff that requires you to commit shit to the board. Like you have to commit to the board.
I'm gonna flesh this theory out more with you guys later, but I've been thinking that it might be the case that Magic is getting so powerful that in order for aggro decks to win, they are going to inherently feel really unfair. It's gonna be, oh my god, red aggro killed my 2-drop and then played 3 creatures out, attacked me for a bunch, and then domed me for 6 to kill me. And then it's gonna be like white decks taxed the crap out of my hand and just curved out on me, and that's how I died. Because the alternative to that is I played 1 mana removal spell, I played 2 mana removal spell, I played Snowball 3-drop and won the game.
Which is what's happening a lot right now. Yeah, no, I agree. And I think we might end up running into some complaints around that with white, because I've said this before, right? Like people complaining about control, like, oh, I got countered, and like I didn't get to... And I understand why. I don't want to dismiss like anybody's like feelings around this. I understand why people feel this way. But like against the controlling deck that did that, like you got no more shafted than if you played against mono red and they went like 1-drop, 2-drop, really powerful 3-drop, bolt the shit that can block my shit, prowess all my dudes, and kill you by like turn 5.
Yeah, the game has been over. The game has been over for 4 turns sometimes, and the control, it just took longer for you to actually die. And so it gave you a feeling of agency that you didn't feel like you had against the aggressive deck.
Yeah, exactly. Like the game is over faster, and I think it comes down to like know when to fold up your hand and go to the next game. But yeah, yeah, this is all like we'll probably maybe like eventually if we do something really transformative in White, we can do like a theory crafting episode. But let's go ahead and move on. White has hand disruption now, and it has more stack interaction. Mana Tithe is a very old card, but Reprieve, which is basically better White Remand, and even Interrupter are sort of examples of this. And to be honest with you, I kind of hope that they do more of it.
Yeah. Mana Tithe is broken, by the way. Mana Tithe just gets better and better.
It's very
I've walked back that opinion from my personal opinion when Reprieve came out is I want to see more of this. I actually don't want to see more of this now. At least not to the extent of Reprieve, because I think Reprieve in White is so much more broken than Remand in Blue.
Oh, definitely.
To the point where, like, Reprieve is a deciding factor. I don't think a counterspell should be a deciding factor card in an aggro, like, or a creature-based strategy. I've seen Reprieve just win way too many games. Yeah. Maybe stuff like this that doesn't cantrip, I think would be like where I'm like okay with it. The fact that Reprieve cantrips is just like really dumb to me.
Yeah, this is like the Tyvar Stain's problem in White, right? Is just like your opponent's holding up the obvious, like they've got it, but it doesn't matter because you can play into it and lose to it, or you can play around it and lose to whatever they've got in play.
I believe Reprieve is S tier, like white card for our cube.
It is. Yeah. And just to illustrate, like to build on what Tim just said a little bit for anybody like kind of scratching their head as to like why we think this is better than Remand. Remand like puts off the play in a blue deck, which generally is not beating your opponent to death. Reprieve saying like, no, you may not have your Grave Titan, and also like I have a slew of shit on board that's basically going to turn. Basically, like Reprieve can like in an indirect way hit your opponent for like 10 damage
at virtually no cost too.
At virtually no cost. Yeah.
Oh, I thought the reason Reprieve was better is because it got Balustrade Worm. Isn't that why Remand is bad?
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it can get Niv Mizzet Perun off the stack.
Yeah.
What else is White doing these days?
Another thing that we're seeing more of in White, and even Interrupter is already a card that we talked about, but we're seeing an increased density of like flash effects, sort of like response effects. Resto Angel already existed, and so did Archangel Avacyn, but now we have cards like Wandering Emperor, and we actually have a new card from Foundations that I'm kind of excited to see what it does, because I think it may also sort of help like deal with some of White's problem, which feels like it getting picked apart. Celestial Armor is 2 and a white for an artifact equipment with flash, and when it ETBs attached to the target creature you control, that creature gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn, which is the Tyvar Stan effect. And then the equipped creature also has +2/+0 and flying, and an equip for 4. So it can basically blank a removal spell. You know, even if it's like a -X thing that would ignore the indestructible, which is what makes Tyvar Stand so powerful, right? Is it gives hexproof and indestructible. And then it leaves behind basically an effect that gives any creature +2/+0 and flying, which is enough to make any creature, even a 1/1 token, sort of a relevant damage dealer. And one of the other things that's really nice about this card is even if you don't need like the hexproof or whatever, if your opponent like attacks in with a flyer, like an obnoxious flyer that they don't think you can block, you can just flash this in, give one of your blockers flying and indestructible, and just like eat it.
Yeah, it's also a combat trick. This card has so much flexibility.
Yeah, it's really strong. And then leaving behind, frankly, like the equip cost is expensive, but you're just getting all this crazy shit up front. Like leaving behind an equipment that we talked earlier about White is having some problems with the ability to kind of close out the game and reach. Flying and evasion of any kind, really, which in White is basically just flying, right? You don't see menace in White, is how you do that. So I expect great things out of this card.
Yeah, for those at home, like we've flying is always a bit tricky because it is one of the best ways to close games, but it's also can be frustrating for players. But we think it's so important to White that at the moment we're trying Maul plus Celestial Armor plus Archangel Elspeth, and all basically do the same thing. They have +2 power and flying. And then we're on top of that playing Steel Seraph as a ways to try and make sure White has the ability to get over the top and close games.
100%.
You heard it here first. Flying good.
Flying good.
Flying good. I know these takes are hot. They're so hot and so controversial, but just bear with us.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible that we end up eventually sort of cutting down on this effect a little bit if people feel like, oh, I can just never block white creatures. But and Harold actually he was so mad. I theory crafted like a mono white aggro deck where I didn't give myself like literally everything, but I gave myself a very good version of it. No, trust me, I did not give myself literally everything. I could have gone harder, but I basically played it against like an old deck that one of our players, Harold, had, and it was like a black-red mid-range, like oops all removal deck with Aquazats and Grave Titan in it, so I was like never going to win that matchup. But I experienced this thing, and then when he added me later after going 1-2 with it, he kind of articulated the same thing, which is white aggressive decks have been, prior to some of the changes that we just made, which hopefully will remediate it a little bit, we're having a problem where it feels like you can get your opponent down to like 6 life, and then you just can't finish. Either because you got them to 6 life by really committing to the board and then you get wrathed, or they play like a Grave Titan effect, which Grave Titan is currently benched. I hope it doesn't stay that way forever because I love that card, but you get like Grave Titaned or Inferno Titaned or like Elspethed or Aquazats, which is another card that we cut for very similar reasons. It's like, okay, well, I got you to 6, but I don't really see how I win this game now. So that was a little tangential because we were talking about flash stuff, but like White's ability to vault things, I think, is going to become increasingly important. White has gotten some more kind of recursion options, although I wouldn't say it's emerged as like a heavy theme. We probably have more options than we realize that we do. But Sarah Paragon has been very strong. For those of you that aren't familiar, Sarah Paragon is 2 white for a 3/4 flying angel, and once during each of your turns, you may play a land from your graveyard or cast a permanent spell with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard. If you do, it basically gains like the finality counter thing, where if it gets removed again, it gets exiled.
But you gain 2 life when it happens.
You gain 2 life when it happens. Oh yeah, you do gain 2 life when it happens.
Can I just give the design team just a moment of rare, like, being very happy with WotC about this card? Like, this is one of my favorite white cards, and it is the perfect spot of powerful but not too good for our cube. The effect is cool in that it just is generically good, but you can also build into it. And on top of all of that, the art is S tier. Like,
yeah, the
rare total
good.
W from top to bottom on this card for WotC.
Yeah, this is an awesome card. It's the kind of card where it's going to be a lightning rod for removal, like, immediately, but I think the way that you're supposed to play this card is basically if you have anything else to do in your hand that's productive, you're supposed to just do that and just try to make your opponent grind through as much of their answers as possible, and then like play this like on turn like 6 when you have 5 mana in play, and you just go like this Thraben Inspector, which generates more card advantage. This used to be disgusting when we were playing Lurrus, because like your opponent would kill your Lurrus, which could recur things, and then you could just play this later and recur your Lurrus, and then you had 2 things that were putting shit back onto the battlefield. A nice line, not a broken line, but a nice line with this card is you can just play it on turn 4, even if you don't have anything to cast, and you can just like play a fetch land out of your graveyard like immediately.
Turn 5.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're
what
right.
you can do, and this is why, again, if you don't draft Mishra's Bauble, people, draft Mishra's Bauble, because what you can do is if you have a Mishra's Bauble in your graveyard, you can cast your Sarah Paragon on curve and go up a card. Draft Mishra's Bauble highly. It's broken. It's a very broken card.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you literally, I don't know that it would always be good to do this, right? But if you literally had nothing else to do, if you just Mishra's Baubled every turn, you would just know what your opponent was about to draw every single turn and draw a card every single turn. That's pretty good.
Well, you only get to do it once.
Only Lurrus does that.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Only Lurrus does that. Yep.
But the point is, you go up a card, and if you untap a Sarah Paragon, you probably have more to do with it. But yeah, fetch lands and Mishra's Bauble are both big pickups here. You want to prioritize like 1-drops even higher. Like if you have this card in your deck, the Raymond Inspector jumps up in priority even higher than it normally would be. Also, if you play this card with fetch lands and you're going to cast a Thraben Inspector out of the graveyard, crack your fetch land first. Don't play your fetch land and then play Sarah Paragon and then crack your fetch land, because your opponent can kill it on the stack. But yeah, great card, just incredible recursion engine. Yeah, really, really powerful card that will take over the game, but oftentimes will just generate a little bit of value and then die.
Yeah, not to mention the fact that like this isn't an impressive stat line by any means, but when you attach it to all the recursion power we just talked about, 3/4 flyer for 4 that does this, that's a pretty solid stat line. And if you have anything on board that's antheming your creatures, like this is large and in charge. Another card that does white recursive stuff that we played for a while, and then we ended up cutting it because no one was playing it, although I still think it's really good because white has so many 3-drop creatures that just generate value as they sit, or like even a Luminarch Aspirant. This card's Helping Hand. It's a single white for a sorcery, and you just return target creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. It's unearthed. It's unearthed without cycling. But white has cards like Adeline and Delny, which we'll talk about in a minute. White has 3-drops that generate card advantage. Like it has 2 drops that, progressively make your board bigger. I still think Helping Hand is a very good card. It's just we cut it because no one was putting it in their deck.
Yeah, Helping Hand's good. This is I was talking earlier about the kind of like core Skyfisher slot that they have in every set, and the small ball white recursion spell is another one that we see in every single set. It's in like that kind of design skeleton. Most of them are like 2 mana for get back a mana value 3 or less with some upside, and we haven't really tested any of those out, but like you made a comment just a second ago that there's probably other recursive cards we could look into. I don't think the 2 mana versions of this effect are bad. The upsides are usually pretty minor. It's stuff like put a roll token on the creature you got back, or one of them's a room that has like a really expensive second half. So I think Helping Hand is the best version of those effects for higher power cubes, but there are a lot of these floating around. Like the recursion identity of getting back small creatures from your graveyard in white, it's obviously there. Like it's in every single set. There's at least 1 or 2 cards dedicated to doing that.
Yeah, I think at lower power levels, like in our Peasant Cube, the upside cards are all kind of just better than Helping Hand. The Return Triumphant and the Room and all that are really, really great. The Room especially is just fantastic. But yeah, here at the higher power levels, just the raw efficiency and mana value advantage you get, I think is much more important. Helping Hand is the exact kind of card that allows you to double spell on, cast a 3-drop, Helping Hand, put back a 3-drop, and now you've generated a pretty substantial tempo advantage.
One of the things I was going to say later is, like where does white go from where it's at right now, like to continue evolving? And I think Graveyard Identity is a place that can still be explored pretty heavily in white. And they've been doing that a lot with recursion, but I think there's probably more to tie the room together there.
Yeah, I think I would maybe like to see a white creature that, like, when you resolve a creature spell, you can like put a creature with mana value 2 or less back onto the battlefield or something.
So Teshar?
Yeah, like a Teshar type card that isn't so specific. But yeah, something like that. I don't know what that would look like, but recursion's really not anything at the end of the day though than like card advantage really, and white has some ways to generate card advantage now that it didn't used to. Welcoming Vampire was considered really, really strong when it came out. I think it's probably gotten a little power crept, but that's a 2/3 flyer for 3 that if a creature with, power 2 or less ETBs, you draw a card.
Yep, once per turn, yeah.
Yep, Wojak Investigator is probably a more powerful version of that effect that I think we're at a place now where my concerns about it when it was initially printed I'm not as concerned. It is a 2/4 flying vigilance for 3. At the beginning of your upkeep, investigate once for each opponent who has more cards in hand than you, which is sort of a nod to you being sort of an aggressive, hand-dumpy sort of deck, and I think this could also help you rebuild after, playing out a lot of cards, which white kind of wants you to do. Enduring Innocence, which we are playing, is 1 white for an enchantment creature, Sheep Glimmer. It's a 2/1 lifelink, not a good stat line. However...
Why did I think this was a fox?
It's a sheep, my guy.
It has foxy vibes, but foxes are not innocent, dude. They are awesome. I kind of want one as a pet, but it's 2/1 lifelink. Whenever 1 or more creatures you control with power 2 or less enter, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn, and then when it dies as a creature, you can return it to the battlefield as an enchantment, so the effect just sticks around because the front half wouldn't be good enough on its own. This actually, one other card I want to mention is Splitskin Doll, which is a 2/1 that if you have another creature on board with like power, I think it's 2 or less, it cantrips when it comes into play. One thing that I want to note here about white is that these smaller creatures that provide card advantage are a lot better than they would be in other colors because white has so many ways to make those small, insignificant bodies significant bodies, right? It's why, and I'm finally with Teld on this one. I've been with Teld on this one for a while now, but like I think in white, 3-bit Inspector is just so much better than most of the Savannah Lions variants that you're playing. Because generally speaking, I think a 2/3 is better than a 3/2. And if you play one Anthem effect, like a 1-mana 2/3 that investigated, very strong.
Yeah, notably your 2/3 will still also draw cards off of these, because one of the downside of Anthems is that they can push your smaller creatures outside the band for Delny, Enduring Innocence, Split Skin Doll type cards. I also wanted to shout out one more PSA, is that Recruiter of the Guard is terrible. It used to be good, and if you have a very specific reason, like a combo for using it, maybe you can use it, but it's just bad. And I still see it in cubes, like the Arena Cube, and it's real bad. I've got the, I know we're all against data here, but I've got the win rate posted. It's garbage. It's a bad card. Stop playing it.
Yeah, I'm looking at this now. Yeah, unless you're specifically going and if you're getting unless you're getting a specific card that solves a specific problem, this does not seem very strong to me.
Or Kiki Jiki Mirror Breaker.
Yeah.
Yeah, or something like that. Like yes, with creature combo, sure. Like, but yeah, I'm looking at this now and like in a completely fair cube where you're just like going and getting your best 2-drop or whatever. This does not look very strong.
White threes are just better than this these
Yeah,
days.
it's true. What an area that White has been pushing into, and like this, I think is probably more relevant for like Commander, probably. But I mean, if you're building an Affinity Cube, there are more cool options. And actually, Tim, this is probably for you to talk about more because you have an Affinity Cube. But like one cool White artifact card, artifacts. I don't know if I mentioned that. That's what I was going to talk about. Artifact card is Oswald Fiddlebender from AFR. He's a bear. Oswald Fiddlebear.
Fiddle Bearer.
Fiddlebear. Ugh, I don't know if I like that. One and a white. Diddlebender. One and a white for a 2/2. For a gnome artificer, and then he has an ability to pay white and tap to sacrifice.
You're just gonna skip over magical tinkering?
Yeah, I was gonna go on a tirade about AFR trying to like D&D it up, and I'm not gonna do it. White and tap, sacrifice an artifact, search your library for an artifact card with mana value equal to 1 plus the sacrificed artifact's mana value, put it onto the battlefield, and shuffle. So it's basically like a white birthing. It's like an artifact birthing pod on a creature, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, my gut instinct is that people probably use this to do some degenerate combos, but when I see this, I just want to like get all of the cards that let me untap this and just keep tinkering. I don't actually want to get anything off this. I just want to like tinker relentlessly.
I played against it in Brawl a decent number of times, and like the decks do cool things. Nothing I'd ever considered degenerate. I know there's like CEDH lines where you can like work up a chain birth and pod style all in one turn, but yeah, I mean, this is all to the point that like the artifact stuff is usually very parasitic unless you're going like all in on it. But
I will say, I think at lower power levels, that's not necessarily true. I think it's much easier to insert, like we just did it in our Peasant Cube, right? As we inserted some artifact themes, and I think there's just enough generic cards that can either generate like clues, maps, bloods, random artifacts, whatever, and cards that can take advantage of those.
The Tchotchke Revolution helps this sort of like artifact synergy stuff, and
the Tchotchke
there's
Revolution, I like that a lot.
Yeah, I can't take credit. That's Rachel Weeks refers to the like trinkety artifacts as tchotchkes, but yeah, there's things that just spit out to. I mean, even next set like Ether Drift's coming out. There's supposedly like a vehicle token that's going to be like blood or whatever. Like that, if you want artifacts to work in a cube, you can make it work in white, and white has the support for it. Just you kind of want to. I'm not. This isn't meant to be like a cube design episode, but you don't want it to be like sitting on a shelf over there doing its own thing. And it doesn't gel with the other colors. You really want to find like the artifact centric stuff that kind of bleeds into other colors fine. So things like living weapon equipment or for Mirrodin equipment can just be like kind of good cards on their own and bolster this strategy. Artifact based removal, things that make clue tokens. Thraben Inspector, secretly just one of the best artifact cards you can put in a cube, which I don't really need to convince people of that. I think the whole world is on Thraben Inspector and Novice Inspector already. So
cards like Elvish Archivist, Teething Wormlet, Sokinson Smelter, those are good ways to spread out the sort of payoffs for those cards in that, you do need to be doing something with those cards, but they don't care about if it's a token or not. So you can just kind of incidentally have some super overstated creatures or generate a ton of value. And there's all kinds of lines you can do with those. So you can definitely do stuff with it. I think as you approach like what I would call the higher end of like regular cubes, I think this effect starts to kind of fall off, and then it weirdly flip-flops in that once you hit like vintage cube territory, it becomes really, really powerful again for different reasons though. Then it's like more the Kappa, Cannoneer, Tinker kind of stuff where you're just doing really, really broken things.
Fable of the Mirror Breaker, that's a fun artifact card.
Oh yeah. It also synergizes with enchantments and discard. You can put it in your Madness cube.
You should just put it in your low power enchantments cube. And
I forgot about this Oltec Matter Weaver dude from the Big Score or whatever.
Yeah, that card's good. Part of the reason that we didn't include it was we were concerned that it would actually be more detrimental to aggro's performance than like a benefit to it. But I do think that if white creature decks kind of continue to underperform, like this card is very strong.
I agree it's strong, but my problem with this card is actually more that, one, it's competition. I think when you compare it to Adeline and Sanguine Evangelist, it just looks really pathetic in comparison. In that, both of those cards are totally fine top decks, and Ultech Matter Weaver is a garbage top deck.
Yeah, it's not a good one.
If a card's going to be a garbage top deck, like, it needs to do something really impressive. Like, Enduring Innocence is going to draw you an extra card every turn, even though it's not a great top deck. You know, and even something like Delny, actually, a lot of times, some people are suggesting that the most powerful thing about it is that it basically tells your opponent they're not allowed to block. And I can get down with that, but that would make Delny an excellent top deck, right? As opposed to, you play it on turn 3, it's a great engine. You play it later into the game, your opponent can't block. Ultech Matter Weaver has the problem of it's like fine on curve, but you really do need to play it on turn 3 because it's not really good anytime else, right? You're not going to, unless maybe you can play it on turn 4 with like a 1-drop, right? And then maybe that's maximizing it. But if you draw it anytime after turn 4, turn 5, you're probably not getting much value out of it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And this is all to say that white plays in artifact space a little bit, right? Like,
it does.
That's kind of the whole point.
To come back around to what we were actually talking about.
Well, we should mention that when you cast a creature spell, the token that it makes is an artifact creature, and it also has the weird secondary line of text, which, like, you're probably going to struggle to make work in your cube, but I'm sure it has some kind of, like, weird combo implications in some point. When you cast a creature spell, you can either make a 1/1 gnome artifact creature token, or you can create a token that's a copy of target artifact token you control, which is hyper specific, but I'm sure you can do really powerful shit with it.
Yeah, so like a couple of last things on this card. 1, card structs. 2, don't target incubate tokens because they have +1 counters, and so you'll make a token that instantly dies. And then thirdly, if you had a card that could perhaps return itself to hand after you resolved it, would allow you to really generate some value there.
Your white mane lion, go crazy with white mane lion.
Yeah.
We talked about anthems already, but anthems are powerful, I think, these days. Like, they're basically one of the best things like a Selesnya deck can do. It's why Tristani Discordant, is a mainstay in our gold section. But beyond just like +1/+1 effects, we have things like Virtue of Loyalty and Light Shield Array, the other side of Gobakon, that like not only buff your board but like continue to buff your board up like progressively more. The Intrepid Adversary as well, like on 6 mana, that's a double anthem, while just being a fine anthem on 4. So yeah, anthems are way better than just like janky, glorious anthem type cards
glorious
these days.
Anthem is so bad in comparison to the anthems you have access to.
Yeah.
Like, even in our early iterations of this cube, like years ago, like Glorious Anthem was a super famous card, so we put it in here, and I was like, why doesn't it feel good? And it just turns out that
it came out in a core set, I think, and we played it, and is like, yeah, this does not hold up.
It's just not good. Yeah,
we're Ultramarine Honor Guard gamers these days, guys.
yeah. When do we get that one? That's a cool one for paper.
Yeah, it turns out that when your anthems either like create bodies or draw cards or continuously anthem to a greater effect or disrupt your opponent's hand or whatever, and this is not a pure white card, but War Leader's Call, which is a Boros Glorious Anthem that glorious anthems but also impact tremors. Like, there's just much better anthems that you have access to. One other thing that white does now that I wanted to touch on really quickly is we're starting to see some. We were talking about how back in the day, like, most white cards were just really boring designs. We've gotten some more interesting designs, and we've talked about this on the show before, but I just want to shout out Delny Streetwise Lookout again. Almost got cut from the cube for being too cute, because we were looking for the 3-drop slots competitive, and then Doug broke it. Delny Streetwise Lookout is 2 and a white for a 2/2 legendary creature Human Scout. It's a really awful stat line, but it has a lot of cool lines of text. Creatures you control with power 2 or less can't be blocked by creatures with power 3 or greater. So all your small ball creatures are only going to be able to be blocked by your opponent's small ball creatures, and presumably as a white deck you have a lot more small ball creatures than they do. And then the other powerful line of text on this is, if an ability of a creature you control with power 2 or less triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. Blood Artists trigger twice. ETB abilities trigger twice. Draw a card when this thing happens triggers twice. There's a lot of double triggers that you can get off of Delny, and if it's simultaneously sneaking in damage and double triggering, like ETB effects and stuff like that, it can generate a lot of really wild value really quickly.
Mm-hmm. I noticed your interesting design section consists of exactly one card.
Oh, it's just the most interesting design, but yeah, I mean,
I didn't know if you had others that came to mind.
No.
Really cool
They're not coming like thick and fast, but like this is an example of a card that like feels
Here, let me
right.
make a quick change real quick.
Interesting design.
Continue.
I like the. I will say I really like the LCI one drop. We played it for a minute in this cube, and it just didn't really work out. But in other environments, it's played out super strongly. I think mostly off of the amount of random tokeny artifacts that a lot of those environments have, and it's slightly slower pace.
I will say too that we don't have access to a lot of White's really cool designs that have come out in the last couple of years. The things that vintage cube playables that come to mind, things like Staff of the Storyteller, Glimmer Lens. Like there are actually a lot of really cool White cards that I would love to have on Arena, but we don't have access to them. But White does get more interest in designs than just Delny. There are other things out there, but we don't have a lot of experience with them, so we're not going to bring them up here.
Yeah, would love to have Glimmer Lens as another Stoneforge target.
If I had to call out like some other interesting White designs, they'd be like cards we've already talked about. Like Aven Interrupter is a weird White card. Wandering Emperor is a very interesting, like not traditionally White card. So is Celestial Armor. Yeah. So like we've already covered some of the quote unquote interesting designs by virtue of the fact that they are also like powerful new kind of effects. I think Delny's sprung to mind because it's like extremely unique.
Yeah. Well, I've got an interesting design for you. So this kind of segues, unless you had other designs you want to talk about or more about Delny, to segue into kind of our last mini section to wrap things up. There is this last section is like where do we see White evolving from here, from where it is now to like the next 5 years? And one thing that caught my attention with the Ether Drift stuff coming up from Maro's spoiler is he announced that there was going to be a cycle of legendary vanilla creatures in Ether Drift, which immediately like raises red flags. Like, why would we do? Like, what does that mean? And by the time you're listening to this episode, Ether Drift spoilers will already be kind of flowing, so you might actually know what this card is. But I can't help but wonder, like, first off, is there a gimmick to it? Is it like MDFCs or something like that? But if it's truly just like, here's 5 vanilla creatures in 2025, and they're all legendary, so presumably they're supposed to be like cool and interesting, like what does a White vanilla legendary look like in 2025? And the only answer I can really think of is 3-1 for 1, right? Like a card we've been asking for. But like I'm very interested to see, like, as far as interest in design goes, like what does that mean? What does this end up being? Like maybe there's a gimmick to it that makes it like not really legendary, but
there's gonna have to be, right? Because otherwise what are you doing? You're just printing like 5 overstatted creatures.
That's kind of what it has to be.
Presumably by vanilla, he also doesn't mean French vanilla, right? So the red creature's not going to have haste.
He said the thing says a cycle of vanilla legendary creatures. So I assume not French. I assume like Yargle and Multani style cards, like Isamaru style cards.
I really think if we don't get a 3x for 1, we're gonna riot. And when you riot, you can give it +1/+1 anyway.
Yeah. Here's my prediction. I predict vehicle MDFCs where like it's the creature and then the back half is like their vehicle, and you can just play it out as a creature or you can play the vehicle.
I feel like there's a gimmick to it too, where it's not actually vanilla. Like part of it is vanilla, but there's like another part to it. That's my sneaking suspicion as well.
I don't know. Like if we were to parse these out there, what would they look like? So the black, because the problem I'm having is the black and red one. I mean, because I could see the blue one's just gonna, if we just crafted up what would be a vanilla creature, it'd be like a 4-mana 2/20 crab,
2/19 or what? Yeah, exactly.
And then the green creature will be Gigantosaurus, but even bigger. Yeah,
12/8 for 3 GGG. Perhaps a dinosaur.
A Gigantosaurus that's like just named Bert or something. Bert even lazier. Just Bert
for the modern era. It's like green for like an 8/8 or something.
Just Bert the dinosaur.
I mean, we don't need to go into the design philosophy there, but as far as White goes, like it has to be a pushed aggro creature, right? Like that's the only way to make that relevant.
Like I said, my prediction is vehicle MDFC, because if like that way, from a constructed perspective, if you were going to build like a vehicles deck with these creatures, you could like load 4 of them into your deck, and then if you draw multiples, like on the one hand you can play out the creature half, and on the other you can play out the vehicle half. That's my prediction. One thing I did want to say is, like, with Ether Drift, like, it's supposed to be a race across planes, right? It's not just set on Okay, so if they don't print a green dinosaur creature where the art is clearly inspired by like the T-Rex chasing the Jeep in Jurassic Park, I'm gonna be really
that's
pissed.
such a whiff. Yeah,
That's such a
okay,
win, right? It's so obvious.
Oh yeah, that would be great. I really hope we get some good dinosaur. I know we're getting a dinosaur dragon mount, and if this card doesn't rule, I'm gonna be so mad. I want more good dinosaurs. That way, I can increase the probability that Whatley draws me an extra card.
Well, FBI agent, please. Like, I know the set's probably already printed, but like, it's a great idea, so cut it in. Like Jurassic Park homage, do it.
I didn't know I had an inner Timmy until they started printing good dinosaurs and apes. Like, it turns out like the Jurassic Park thing was just right up my alley. That's what it took to embrace my inner Timmy.
Do you guys know there's like a whole Jurassic Park subset of Magic cards, like mechanically unique Jurassic Park cards?
Yeah, but we don't talk about those. Those are dudes. I want dinosaurs.
Okay, you want dude? I'm sorry,
he wants dude. He wants Dudosaurs.
He wants Bert. Give us Bert. All right, so to round it back together, I just thought that was interesting because it's like we talk about white aggro and how white aggro doesn't really hold a candle to white aggro from 10 years ago, and it's like what can Wizards do to change that in the future? What is the evolution of white? Like maybe just a big dumb vanilla creature. I'm not. We'll see what that's like. We'll know actually what that's like in about a week. So other places white can go. Future evolution, we mentioned graveyard recursion as a place, or not necessarily recursion, but like playing in the graveyard space is something I think is totally in white's slice of the color pie, and I think there's more room for innovation there. Stack interaction is something we mentioned quite a bit in this episode. Like Reprieve, I think, was a knob too far. I would like to see more Mana Tithe style cards, more Quench style cards in white as opposed to blue, but I don't necessarily want white to be a counter spell color. Like we don't want white to be better than blue at stack interaction, but stack interaction is nice. I love Mana Tithe. I think Mana Tithe is just a great fit for what white does. I just think Reprieve kind of like made me walk back asking for too much of this, or too much pushed stuff in this vein.
I think I've been a proponent for a while that blue should be the primary counterspell color, obviously, but white should be the secondary. It should get some amount of this, and then red should be tertiary. So, like, the only card we've really seen is what's the Tibble card that broke Arena?
Trickery. Tibble's
Trickery, sure. I wouldn't mind seeing the occasional like chaosy, randomy sort of red counterspell effect. Like, I think that should be rare. That should be something that's at higher rarities. It shouldn't be like designed to be super powerful, but I don't mind seeing that occasionally. And I don't mind white being a secondary color and having some tax effects, but it would be awkward if we just saw a bunch of good white interaction at stack interaction, right? And it just became like right alongside blue doing blue's thing. Because right now blue has the quench effects. It'd be weird to see, for example, white having a quench effect every set. I think that should be a little more sparse, but still something that white's, it's obviously now inside white's pie is to be kind of disruptive. And I think that's probably fine. Would like to see some more white removal that's actually decent as opposed to all downside.
Well, let's close out on this point, huh? White removal. So we don't need to get into the Wrath debate unless, I mean, what do you guys think? Do you think white can get away with 2 white exile all creatures? Like, that seems like no. Do you think they can improve on Wrath of God without making Sunfalls?
I think there is space, but the awkward thing is it's going to be like entering strictly better territory when they have historically wanted to do strictly worse territory.
I'm okay with strictly better Wrath of God 30 years after Wrath of God has been printed.
I agree. I think printing Day of Judgment in Foundations is probably a good sign that we're going to see some better. I assume, and maybe I'm off base on this, but I think Tim and I have agreed that those are baseline effects now, right? Like, so Llanowar Elves is the baseline. Day of Judgment is the baseline. Like, these are cards that we can improve and iterate on because those are like the generic version of the effect.
Yeah. It's the single target removal that I'm really curious if there's a way to continue to push it, because you can't just, like, you shouldn't just print white Doomblade. And a lot of white removal these days that's really good is in the form of like deal damage equal to the number of creatures you control, which obviously has its problems. think like Case of the Gateway Express or Kabira Takedown or even Thraben Charm or something like that. Like there is good white removal, but it's finicky. And then the clean removal, Carbon, who's been drafting with us a lot, he made a comment. He's like, there's got to be something better that you guys could be playing over Declaration and Stone. And I was like, maybe, but like also probably not. Like,
Fateful Absence really is, in my opinion, but Deck and Stone solves indestructible problems. Yeah, Deck and Stone is not very strong. Journey to Nowhere is way better, in my opinion, but
I do think the fact that these cards frequently, like Fateful Absence, right? Most of the time, it feels bad to cast, but also it can kill your opponent's Planeswalker, which is like, I think a super underrated thing about the card, because there's increasingly fewer removal spells that actually deal with Planeswalkers. And we're in a bit of a Planeswalker renaissance in our cube design, and at least in white, right? There's 4 of them now. And so cards that can, and it's a little awkward because it's in white, which is the Planeswalker color. But being able to kill Planeswalkers on top of it when a lot of the removal spells now only kill creatures is, I think it is notable. I would like to see like cards that aren't that big of a downside because you literally give your opponent an extra card. But I do think the cards tend to play out a little better than they kind of read a lot of times.
One of the reasons that these white spells tend to have downside, or at least the newer ones, is that they can tag Planeswalkers or like other types of permanents, which actually it's one of the things that irritated me a little bit when they printed Bitter Triumph. Is it's like, okay, you're giving me the same flexibility, except like I would rather a lot of the time, I think, pay 3 life than give my opponent an extra card, depending on what my deck is doing. Also, like Bitter Triumph, you can also like discard a card, right? So there are actually a number of decks with recursive creatures where you're just like, okay, nerd, I'll discard my Bloodghast and then I'll play my land for turn or whatever.
Sure. But black should have the best removal for creatures. That's like that is what it does.
No, I don't disagree with that. What I'm saying is like black Doomblades also being able to touch Planeswalkers kind of makes it a little bit more difficult for me to argue like, oh, well, white removal has these downsides, but at least you can get Planeswalkers. I don't think Bitter Triumph is busted or anything. A couple of things I wanted to say real quick before we like wrap up. I think white as a contributor to mid-range is doing just fine. Personally, I think it's doing just fine. We just had a green-white 3-0 with just white's best mid-range cards in it. I think for white aggro to put up more numbers and feel more viable, I think it needs to be more resilient. Black is obviously very resilient and rebuilds from its graveyard. And also, depending on what cards are in your deck, punishes your opponent for cleaning your board up. Red doesn't have to commit as many creatures to the board, and if you take care of the creatures that it does have, it has a number of haste threats that can just come out and like immediately start beating again. Plus the reach of burn. White definitely feels right now like a color that has difficulty rebuilding from mass removal or just being picked apart by small ball removal, because a lot of what white does well is making your creatures larger or like having some engine-y creature, and if you invest your +1/+1 counters into like a thing or whatever and it gets picked off for 1 mana, that feels like shit. So I want to see more stuff like Celestial Armor. I want to see more playable protection spells, like God's Willing is probably not good enough. I'd like to see some more recursion, maybe that's attached to a body. And I like this white kind of hand pokey disruption. Maybe like some tax effects that don't also tax you. I don't know. I'd like to see white get stickier, like more disruptive, because like red and black don't really do that, right? They don't disrupt. So I like the idea of leaning into white as a disruptor, but for the modern age, like not hate bears, and then be a little stickier also.
I would love to see Plume Creed Escort as a white card.
That'd be cool.
Like maybe indestructible instead of hexproof, but like something that adds to the board. And like Avacyn kind of does this, right? 5 mana Avacyn comes down, makes your board indestructible, but that's a 5 mana card. Like a cheaper, maybe less like splashy, bomby version of that. It was just a 2 mana flash creature that can like eat a removal spell while also progressing your board state.
I like that, and that actually feels very white to me. You know, the idea of like a creature coming down and protecting another creature, like guarding that creature, that feels very white. Another thing, and they're not going to do this, I don't think, because it's been pretty firmly established as like a red thing, and I can kind of understand it as a red thing, but I think that it would make sense to have like, like the Screaming Nemesis effect, where if it gets dealt damage, it deals damage to like another creature or your opponent. Like there's the white color pie thing of like balance, like there's some eye for an eye stuff in white that's kind of part of the color pie, like that, like Retribution like retribution is like a white thing, right? So if you had like a white creature that when it was dealt like damage, it deals like maybe to not make it ridiculous, like make it some flat amount of damage to your
Well,
opponent's
that
face.
we've
So
got
it basically gets.
I mean, it's not a cubable card, but Phyrexian Vindicator does that, right? The white obliterator. That
Oh yeah.
isn't it? Doesn't that literally just redirect damage to other targets that's dealt to it?
Yeah, I think it does. I think it does. So yeah, give that to me on a cubable card. That would be cool. Like, so White's ability to like reach through gummed up boards isn't just like whoops all flyers.
Sure. Yeah, damage redirection is like maybe it's a little bit complex, but it's highly unexplored territory, I think.
Yeah, I think it would be cool in White. I think it would be flavorable for White too. Just like retributive paladin or something, like you killed me, but like I'm taking you with me type of a thing.
Sure. Yeah. I want to see more settle the wreckages. Okay. To close things out, remember you can always find Jank Diver Gaming on Twitter at Jank Diver Gaming, youtube.com/Jank Diver Gaming, find Teld streaming on twitch.tv, and I'll report back on the next episode how the whole TikTok thing worked out. So yeah, White's got some more evolving to do. Again, this came from a place of like mostly White aggro not being great in our cube at the moment, and some of the changes we've made, some of the cards that came up because of that. But also we didn't necessarily want to frame this as just like griping about a color again, because we do that quite a bit. It seems we always have a problem child. At different points last year it was like blue and red, and now it's white. So who knows, maybe one day we'll achieve that perfect zen of like the colors are all where we want them to be, but I think that's the cube design, right? It's never going to be like that.
Yeah, I mean, I have complaints to make about green, but it's not really the color's bad, just more like its play patterns.
You're just mad there's no dinosaurs for Huatli. That's literally your only complaint.
You got me.
All right, so that's going to go ahead and do it for this one. I believe from the time we're recording this, Ether Drift previews start in 2 days, and I think they're doing the thing where all of the previews will be out over the course of like 8 to 9 days. So our next episode will almost certainly be Ether Drift review, and we'll probably get Danelius on for a peasant review as well. Time permitting, I've picked up like a whole additional hat at my job this month, so like even more busy than before. But I'll get these episodes out. We'll get them done. That's going to go ahead.
A picture of like Tim wearing like a nesting Russian doll of hats on top of his head. He just takes one off, and each one gets progressively smaller.
No, he just has two top hats stacked on top of one another.
I go out to the fancy restaurant. They're like, "May I take your hat?" And it's like, "Yes," and take it off. And there's just another smaller hat underneath it. It's like, "Would you like to take this one too?" It's like a Family Guy bit or something. I don't know. Yeah, that's gonna go ahead and do it for this one. Thanks for hanging out, and we will catch you all next time. All right, very small sign off. Don't worry, no game show this time. But don't worry, there will be more of those in the future. And
they will be completely unrigged and totally fair.
They've always have been. I don't know why you would even mention that. So you each have a red button in front of you, and you're going to be asked a question. And
oh, weird! I hadn't noticed that.
You're going to be given a proposal, and if you hit the red button, the proposal will come to fruition.
This isn't even going to be about magic. This is just going to be like Tim exploring the darker side of our psyches.
No, I did. These are magic related. Also, might explore the darker side of your psyche, incidentally. But Teld, you've been presented this proposal. All of the teachers in the United States of America will make twice their current annual salary if you press the red button, but you must mulligan to 6 in every game you play for the rest of your life.
All right, so I'm gonna quit Magic, guys. This is my retirement. I'm gonna go ahead and collect double pay. It's been good hosting it with you, but we're just gonna go ahead and call it quits here. And
what a shill! What a shill!
I'll just have to cry wipe my tears off with the double amount of money that I'm making.
Yeah, might not have been good to ask him. Like, it might have been good to ask him, like, are you willing to make the sacrifice for other people, right? Because, like, in this case, he's making like teachers across America lives better, but also he can just buy decks that don't need the 7th card to just wallop everything.
You know what would happen is like monkey paw curls, and it's like Wizards announced that like all start in hands are 6 cards or some shit. I don't know. Like,
I was just gonna say that they change our contracts to be like you have to work 60 hours.
There's definitely
Monkey
like,
paw curls. He takes a 50% pay cut before the doubling.
Chris, you've got a red button in front of you, and your proposal is that you're offered a $120K per year salary at Wizards of the Coast, designing and maintaining cubes. But you're under the direct supervision of Doug, who plays anime music at top volume on repeat in the office.
Oh, I'm not taking that deal. I'm not taking that deal. No.
Some things are too much for one lifetime.
Yeah, no. Sorry, that one was not hard.
Alright folks, I need everyone's attention. Our new Death Race set, Ether Drift, is coming out soon, and we've only got 2 days to design it since we have to jam Innistrad Remastered and Pioneer Masters back-to-back within a 1-month span of each other. We've already designed a bunch of interchangeable vehicle cards for the set. We just need card names. Any name will do for any vehicle, so hit that line in front of you and let me know what you've got. How about Ragavan, Yargle and Bugatti, Vroomsday, You'll Never Take Me Alive, Copter, Okio Drift, Curse Elemental, Nissan Ultimatum, Mysterious Limousine? No, that's actually just a real card name. Oh, shoot, how about Dodgy Jalopy? That's also a card that already exists. What? No, it's not. Yeah, new Capenna Commander, look it up. Now quit wasting my time, we've got 2 days. More names, people. Garage Mirror, Ford Aerolingus. Thanks for that one, Mop. Lotus Pedal to the Metal. Hey, let's reprint Throttle. I don't know, that seems like pretty weak limited removal by today's standards. Yeah, but it's called Throttle. Alright, I'm sold. Mischievous Stick Shift. Wheels of Fortune? Eat my dust, bitch. Whoa. Hey, not cool. Yeah, what the heck, man? This is still a game for young people. You should be ashamed of yourself. Jesus. Alright, what else y'all got? Sir, I have an idea. What is it, Timmy the Hammer Johnson? What about Kari Zev? No, Timmy, we already have a card named Kari Zev. We can't use that. No, sir, Kari Zev. Jesus Christ, somebody get this man a job. I already work here, sir, and you're doing a fine job. Alright, lunch break. Everybody be back in 30 with your best car puns. We've got a set to ship.